It's an interesting story, but not about superheroes as you might expect. Instead, it's about the world's most dangerous monster, who is far too lazy for this life and just wants a break. Heroes were going through the dangerous dungeon and were already tired and weak. They needed to stay alive for a bit longer to make it. But it was too hard. Too many of them collapsed on the way. Yet men didn't lose hope, because they had hero burn with them. Capitan tried to put in more effort and raise the fighting spirit of his men because there were too many losses on the way. Only 43 people survived. They were unable to protect other allies, even though everyone gave it their all. But it was expected in such a mission like this, because that place was one of the 7 malevolent dungeons named the Core of the Ancient. Finally, they arrived at the end of the dungeon, but with so many sacrifices. They hoped it was worth it, as rumors spoke of countless unimaginable treasures stored in that place. If these men are lucky enough, they might also find the greatest treasures of humanity, the 36 virtuous masterpieces. Hero Burn ordered everyone to get into formation because the end is also a place where the dungeon's master rests. Wizards quickly conjured light to enhance their vision in the moment, but as everyone turned their gaze toward the cave ahead, they were met with a shocking sight. These honored heroes saw an ancient monster who observed them with a look full of hunger. The great Sir Burn only had time to cry out loud, so everyone ran away. Next, we see a conversation unfolding between a monster and a skeleton warrior. The warrior, eager for information, asks the monster about the fate of the people who had recently entered the dungeon. Monster added that he had faced 2 enemies at the same time, both humans and his exhaustion. Skeleton could not believe his ears. Monster predicted future reproaches and asked him to calm down. Warrior was yelling, because it was too careless of him just to doze off until humans were right in front of his nose. How in the world someone who is a boss monster can act like this? Skeleton hoped to have some help from the Renee, but a young and pretty girl with a powerful love aura joined them and said that. The master overwhelmed humans with just a yawn, and Renee was delighted by her Lord Swallow. Skeleton sat and sadly screamed that this dungeon was screwed. Throughout history, most dungeon raids have ended with humans as the victors. This is because humans have the advantage of attacking whenever they choose, while monsters might not always be prepared for the attack at that exact moment. But there existed exceptions, dungeons that humanity could not raid. Those are called the 7 malevolent dungeons. People put them on hold and called it impossible to clear. Even among them, the Core of the Ancient was the most diabolical. There also existed a lot of monsters who defended the dungeon, as well as guardians who stood on different paths. The red path was secured by a homunculus blade maid, Renee. The blue path was defended by a skeleton named a Death Knight, Patrick. And on the last path was the evil monster, about whom there was no accurate information. The only rumor was about numerous tentacles. Renee closed the book and said that after spreading such a book on Lord Swallow order, the number of intruders had increased. Monster was glad, even though he never expected humans to come in droves like that. Swallow now was talking about all of the equipment that melted down and become unusable. Renee wanted to make his master feel a bit better, so she said that she could have taken care of these heroes without damaging the goods. Lord Swallow transformed into the person and said that he was sure of her abilities. The girl was happy to hear that, but Patrick, who was sitting aside, seemed only gloomier than he was before. Patrick asked if they gathered for the meeting, or just to play games. Dissatisfaction was heard in each word of his, but his mood switched in a second, and he started laughing because the aura around them was too sweet. Also, Lord Swallow had some problems with polymorphism. He didn't even notice his hand with 6 fingers. Renee was furious with Skeleton because he was making jokes about their lord and loudly noticed that his jaw was clacking way too loud. But soon, the monsters from the most dangerous dungeon returned to their work. The problem was that humans had started to find the correct path, making their way through with growing determination. One of the monsters with tentacles received huge injuries. Swallow interrupted her and asked not to worry that much. Regeneration of his monsters isn't a joke. But still, there is an option to find another guardian if that doesn't look too good. Patrick raised his hand and asked to look for a replacement for him as well. Lord reminded him that the warrior was his slave for life. After that, topic was closed. His guardians were worried about people now choosing only the right path and preparing for the new attack. Swallow hit the table and announced their brand new counter strategy, and everyone should listen to it carefully so that they change their assignments. Renee would change her path to help their monster of tentacles heal faster. So formally, there are 2 paths for her to guard now. Girl was happy to help her lord and said that she could defend herself against any number of humans. And now the red path is going under Patrick's protection. When humans realize about the change and discover Renee, they would choose another direction and go to the skeleton warrior. Patrick analyzed everything and asked Booze to hold on for a second. Skeleton asked what the Lord was going to do if humans took the central blue path without any guardian. There was an awkward moment of silence. There was no other choice for humans. They'll just get a direct date with him. Patrick was disgusted with such an idea. But Renee was delighted and started saying that this was too perfect plan. All of the matters were taken care of, and the only thing that was left was to handle what to do with the sword. Patrick started telling that humans who came this time were abnormally strong, yet had such weapons as well. One of the 36 virtuous masterpieces named Tanabella was now in their hands. The blade of Rani is also one of the masterpieces. Swallow noticed that humans this time carried some good stuff. Patrick asked what they should do with this weapon. If they give it to one of the monsters near the entrance, it will be easily taken back. Therefore, the one who should take it is the booze, Swallow asked. Didn't Patrick use it either? Why couldn't he just take it? Skeleton couldn't believe his ears. Happily, he said that he had no other choice but to take this sword, if it was the boss's order. They continued the discussion of the remaining points. They earned many mana stones from the last fight, but they don't have any monsters who need magic items. Lord asked if he should go to the humans' village and sell all of them to earn some money. His guardians were too surprised by such a proposition and nervously asked, wouldn't it be better if Renee went instead of him, so just he stays here in safety? Patrick told the whole truth, that Lord was too clumsy with his transformation into a human. Swallow felt irritated after such confession, but asked Renee to come back with lots of tasty things. Soon Girl came to the nearest village and brought all of the mana stones to the jewelry master. Man felt sorry for her, but couldn't make such a great purchase. Renee asked about the reason for the deal rejection. Jeweler showed her a B-rank mana stone on which the average commoner would save up at least 10 years. Stones like hers can be used at least if the person is on the level of Imperial Magician. Or someone from Magic Tower wouldn't mind buying such treasures. The capital was too far, and Renee decided to approach the Magic Tower. Girl was thankful to the men and left a tip in the form of a nice mana stone. After that, she went away from that village. People from Magic Tower were not really happy to see her, but if the topic was related to mana stones, she was allowed to meet with the guildmaster. The woman of the Middle Ages welcomed her and wondered why this person hid in herself such an immersive amount of mana. Amr said that she was going to ignore her since she was a kid, but the guard said that she brought a bunch of mana stones and now was interested in their quality. Girl said that she could see for herself. What kind are her mana stones? All of them were much higher quality than A-rank mana stones. Those were not something a kid should have. Woman asked Renee where did she find those. Suddenly, Akhmer remembered the family with silver hair among the 8 great houses of the empire. Could it be the daughter who ran away from home with such treasures? The woman apologized for her rudeness and said that their tower wished to purchase them all. The price was 50 ounces of gold for all of them, but Renee remembered the words of the jeweler and screamed that it would be her death if she was joking around. The woman understood her mistake and wondered why Girl knew so much. Magician explained that even if she used all of the money they owned, the magic tower wouldn't be able to purchase all of the crystals. Renee asked her to buy as many as she could in such case. The woman was nervous at that moment, but confirmed the deal. People from Magical Tower gave Renee 2,000 ounces of gold and were supposed to show this girl items, that value as her mana stones. They visited the room full of treasures, but none of them suited Renee's taste. Except, the Crimson Lovestone is such a magical jewel that makes one's love a reality. Hearing about such magic fascinated that little girl. Only if she would infuse mana into the jewel, the spirit inside the stone would bring eternal love. Lady Amr asked if it suited her tastes, and after the price of the object was set as priceless. Renee took a desperate step and proposed to her to take another object in exchange. All of the mana stones from earlier plus her legendary blade for some love object. The alchemist of the tower was asking if Amr really gave that crystal away. Boy was trying to convince her that girl was definitely going to die because there was some kind of curse. Lady didn't even care about that while admiring new mana crystals. But poor Renee had no idea what a pig in a poke she bought and spent on it such a big fortune. At that moment, the girl was heading to Shate Castle, which was one of the 7 malevolent dungeons as well. Renee came to her only friend who helps her in any situation. The woman asked her not to worry that much because neighbors should always look for each other. This local was malevolent dungeon Shate Castle boss Elizabeth Bathory. This woman was happy because no matter what she did, Renee looked pretty. Renee seriously asked Miss Bathory how she looked after all of the procedures. Elizabeth said that she was the most beautiful girl she had seen, and no one would be able to reject her. But the real mystery was a person Renee was getting all dolled up for. Miss Bathory was afraid that the girl was going to confess her love as well. Homunculus confirmed the firmness of her intentions to confess to Lord Swallow. The neighbor was shocked. Miss Bathory could barely think of anything attractive about him and was hoping it was a kind of bad joke. But Renee suddenly started to retell everything she adored about Lord Swallow. Soon Miss Bathory started to smile and said that it was the purest form of love she had ever seen. The woman understood this little girl and hoped everything would work out. She mentioned that the girl deserves a lot better and asked to come to her if he rejects Renee's feelings. But Renee promised to succeed in it. At the same time in the Imperial capital, Lei's dungeon coalition was held due to the bad news. Everyone, of course, hoped that the team would easily defeat the guardians of the dungeon, Their bodies haven't even been discovered yet. They couldn't even believe that Sir Byrne would fall to the likes of monsters. Also, it has been already 2 days since they've heard from him. Byrne is most likely dead. After hearing this, everyone was worried about the future fate of the sword, one of the 36 virtuous masterpieces. Some men proposed to hurry up and go into the dungeon to find them, but some intelligent people said that such operation would be too dangerous. Discussion continued, yet they've lost one of the imperial family's precious heroes and virtuous masterpieces. Even thou, sitting still, would only turn the imperial family furious, so they point their blades at them. But what if Byrne hadn't been able to gravely wound the ancient boss monster in the core of an ancient? The man announced that it would be impossible to conquer the dungeon, the core of an ancient. Everyone in the meeting started to worry and murmur. Someone else also joined the conversation and said that such horrible place can be easily conquered. Men wondered why Imperial Magic Research Association intruded into their meeting. Wizards reminded these warriors whose orders they follow. From that moment it became clear. Imperial family has already started to interfere. Those people from the Magic Association explained that their stupidity is unmatched, or it wasn't enough for them to get an honored hero killed. His Majesty decided to make another raid on Core of the Ancient, but this time with another hero. Sir Byrne failed that raid with his team only because they lacked only one thing, and it is held by Nifrim. Lord Swallow was known for being extremely lazy. This time he didn't want to observe and check each of his rooms with monsters. Only the idea of humans coming back and Patrick scolding was his motivation. This warrior was only a skeleton, but still, he scared the living daylights out of Swallow. Yet the Lord decided to check everything because this time humans came through the whole pathway. Tentacles were severely damaged, but he couldn't help it. Only time would help it to heal. The next was 5th Room Administrator Anthropophagi, who regenerates by themselves as long as the core body is intact. Swallow remembered that in other rooms are monsters as well, but he decided to think about it later. He's looked around only the path and one room, but still, the results were excellent. All of a sudden, something sharp and fast rushed near his ear. Lord used his aura and started saying that filthy human bastards would never come back alive from this moment, and got ready for the attack. But the one who aimed with a blade at him was Renee, who thought as well that it was another cunning human. Mr. Swallow was just a little surprised by such an unexpected attack, but he stepped aside from this topic and asked if Renee was dressed up. It was an extreme happiness for her that the Lord noticed it. Renee also asked how did she looked. Swallow asked if it was made for some kind of special occasion, but secretly he was afraid that Renee was going to put her resignation letter. Girl begged him to spare some time for her especially. Renee welcomed him to her secret spot filled with romantic atmosphere. Swallow was only thinking if only she didn't resign. Girl started to tell that it had been 80 years since Lord Swallow took her in. 80 years ago, a lot of dungeons met their downfall, and thousands over thousands entered the core of the ancient. It was when Renee earned her alias and started growing in status. Girl mentioned that she was so happy to protect Lord Swallow all this time. These words were like a dagger to the heart and made him feel more and more nervous. Swallow asked what she meant by was happy, and if was she going to resign. Renee took a deep breath and confessed that she liked him. Lord didn't expect such a turn of events. Renee continued her speech. For the past 80 years she has been waiting for this moment. Swallow thanked for her being sincere but said that they are always on cups of life and death, so he didn't want to live her life in solitude. Girl predicted that she was pushing it on him, but it was just too heavy for her to carry herself forever. But the thought of Swallow rejecting her confession was too terrifying. Renee wanted to be loved by the Lord, no matter what it took. Girl took out the Crimson Lovestone. Lord Swallow was trying to calm her down. But Renee continued saying that with this object her wish will be fulfilled. Girl started to imbue her mana inside. The next second something bad happened and Lord Swallow became extremely angry and asked if she was just trying to kill him. Suddenly she dropped the stone and some kind of mysterious eyes lit up inside of it. Patrick was extremely delighted with his boss's behavior lately. Firstly, he wasn't satisfied with just driving the humans away, so now he even chased Renee away too. But Swallow was sad he didn't know how to handle it all. Patrick asked why he was looking to him for an answer when he was the one who made the problem. Lord emphasized that he didn't even remember what happened. Patrick decided to remind him everything about that unbelievable fight. When his boss went into berserk mode, Skeleton was trying to stop him from injuring Renee and calm down the atmosphere around him. Poor girl didn't even know what she did wrong. Patrick was trying to reach her, but she was into herself and didn't react. Skeleton pushed her away from that place and created some distance. But what should he do with that furious ancient monster who thinks Patrick is trying to kill him as well? Now Lord Swallow remembered everything and felt horrible. These two should decide what to do next. Renee successfully disappeared and they need to find her because this girl is extremely important to the dungeon. She was making everything beginning from ingredients delivery up to reinstalling the traps / almost every aspect of managing was done by her. Losing her would be more devastating for dungeon than boss disappearing. That's why they must find her before it's too late. Patrick gave him a bracelet that helps with stabilizing mana in the big world, so it should at least prevent his body from pulsing badly in a polymorphed state. Swallow was confused about where had his guardian brought such an expensive thing from. Skeleton begged not to do something strange with it and be serious about looking for Renee. Lord promised to try it at least, but in return for that, Patrick should properly take care of the dungeon while Boss is gone. Skeleton pointed at 5 days for searching, not more. After that, Swallow had to come back, because humans would return indeed. If Patrick wouldn't be able to fend off the intruders while Boss is gone, he doesn't even know what will happen when the humans reach that secret place. But Skeleton was confident in staying safe for 5 days. Lord Swallow promised to come back with Renee on time. When Boss left the place, Patrick could easily breathe out and relax for a second. The latest news were heating up the atmosphere, and now he could see what was going to happen. If Boss finds out about this news, there will be an apocalypse. But it was still too early for mankind to go extinct because of his anger. Unexpectedly, Patrick read in the newspaper that the Dungeon Coalition was going to raid the core of an ancient in 3 days. Now he was in a shitty situation. It was the second time when Swallow teleported to a random place. Maybe it was because of magic, maybe of any other reason. So he decided to try one more time. His coordinates were the place Renee went to sell the monastones. The story turned to another, not less mysterious and demonical place. Glorious Death was sitting proudly on her throne, but desperate heroes, who are named elite mercenaries of Tiger, came to drag her down from the throne. Girls screamed that they were insolent fools who were standing in front of the 17th descendant of the demon king Asmodeus. The captain of the heroical group took those words of hers and started powerful attack. The demon king descendant was doing just fine with these men of honor, but they were reckless and irrevocable. Their continuous attacks made her careless and too proud of herself, so she went into direct touch with opponent, but unknown power separated them. The dust was everywhere in the air, so visibility was below zero. The leader of the group was angry and at the same time interested in who interfered in their fight. Glorious Death was worried that this group of humans could have broken through the castle. Things started not to look good, and what kind of person appeared there out of nowhere? But luckily it was Lord Swallow who was looking for the city of Harston. Both humans and Lady Demons screamed if he really burst here just to ask about such nonsense. A group of heroes recommended him to stay away from that demon king. Girl was saying that they could send as much help as they wanted, but it would be never enough to take down someone like her. Swallow remembered the old Amadeus and wondered how exactly the generation gap worked. Glorious Death added that he would pay for damaging her castle. But everyone at that moment was paying attention only to the support squad, which had just arrived. They wanted to use the whole power to take down the Demon King. Mr. Swallow wasn't satisfied with everyone not listening to him. His main task to find Renee as quickly as possible was making him more and more nervous, so he blew up and made a perfect silence around. Everything alive around was turned into food for that ancient monster. Now he was full and ready to talk to that Demon King descendant. The girl was shocked and truly astonished by his power. Her esteemed self was very interested in him. Glorious Death started asking him a million questions in a second. Lord Swallow truly hated such enormous doses of attention, so he felt disgusted. A weird girl presented herself as a great, well-renowned Demon King, the 17th descendant of Asmodeus Mel's de Lymph. And now she wanted to know about Lord Swallow's true identity. But Boss remembered Patrick's reminders not to reveal the name, because at that time, news were spreading really fast. He named himself Swaldrunier. It sounded iffy, but it was the only name he could remember. Queen immediately started to name him Lord Swald, almost the true name of this monster. But she was really thankful to him for helping her out, and now she wanted to be of help as well. Lord Swallow lit up with joy and asked if she knew the way to Harston. But as it happened, Mel's didn't even know the meaning of this word. At least he was hoping she knew where the nearest human village was. It turned out that she only knew about Liaz. But apparently, the way to the imperial capital would take at least 2 months. The girl couldn't understand what happened with Lord Swald. He explained that she had overshot it by a mile. Melz understood that he wanted to go somewhere far away and suggested using a teleportation hub. Demon King shortly explained to him how this human invention worked, and added that it was placed in the city of Liaz, which was nearby. As soon as they entered the town, Queen started to tell him about an amazing opportunity to gather important information. Swallow felt down because apparently he wouldn't be able to find Renee there. The woman reassured that he was looking for a girl with long and silver hair. Melz promised not to leave him alone with this trouble and to keep up with him. She didn't even worry about the castle that was left empty. The next stop was in the pub. Lord felt frustrated about losing time in such a place, but Demon King was sure they needed to look around and listen to everything to find something important. In such way, a notice board was found. There was so much news about participants of dungeon raids and a lot more. They discussed humans who were willingly walking into fire, blinded by greed and prizes. Lord Swallow noticed that it was better for them. Melz caught Lord at his word and asked if he was a dungeon demon as well. Swallow answered shortly that it was too complicated to explain at that moment and he wanted to just let it slide. The girl understood that he had too many secrets and promised not to press on him. Swallow saw something about his dungeon, but hopefully the subjugation list was empty, and he had some more time. But the Demon King was interested. What he had seen! It appears to be an advertisement for Core of the Ancient. Surely she knew about it. Mel's said that the core contained the strengths of all dungeons in itself, and even humans couldn't help but admire its power. She also said that every demon strives for it. From among the 7 malevolent dungeons, the core is the strongest. And ruled by the Lord of all creation, God's guardian and zenith of all core monsters, her favorite Lord Swallow. Demon King wanted to get stronger to meet Lord Swallow one day in the future. Poor girl didn't know that she was meeting him exactly at that moment. Nevertheless, she continued to talk about unapproachable strength and her will to be like that. Of course, unlike her father was also strong and well-fitted for the throne. But there were humans much stronger than him, and one of them named Burn, who had killed the Demon King a long time ago. That's why the girl didn't want to spend her life managing dungeons like her father. Mal's wished to enable her demons to make their own dungeons. That girl will become stronger, reminded of Swallow's old version of himself. A very long time ago, he was full of vigor and led armies powerful enough to rule the world. He tried to master all the world's knowledge. Back then, he believed that humans were pathetic. But at the end of the path, he realized everything was in vain and his life goal now was to sleep all day long. Sadly, during his speech, Demon King fell asleep. When both adventurers woke up, it occurred to Mels that she didn't remember anything because her headache was awful. Sir Swald was shocked to see in front of him a little girl covered with a huge blanket. Mels was furious and asked if it wasn't too impolite from his side. Lord asked, who then told her to suddenly become so young. It turned out that her appearance yesterday was her version 2, so that humans do not look down on her. Currently it is version number 1. Swallow was shocked that her real appearance wasn't like yesterday, and formally she was still a child. Luckily, transformation magic is originally a spell that projects the user's future appearance. So when Mels grows up, she will definitely look like her splendid version number 2. At the same time, the Third Eye Association came to the Harston Earldom to suppress the core of the Ancient. Earl Etar received the message from the association only an hour before their arrival. But since the Third Eye is under the command of the Imperial family, he couldn't kick them out. The situation was complicated. In case those Imperial bastards touched the core of the Ancient, exactly his territories would face a crisis. Earl Etark didn't really trust those unknown people and wanted to ask some stronger and more trustworthy subjugation party to raid the dungeon. Maid gave him a hint that he might find an answer closer than he thinks. Lord pondered for a moment and remembered about magic tower wings. Also, not long time ago, there was a rumor about the tower receiving a large number of high-quality mana stones. In his earldom, the only monster left on the right trail where even the Guardians weren't defeated is the boss monster who confronted the hero Burn's subjugation party, Swallow. Lord didn't even have time to say a word before the Third Eye bastards had already come in. Etark wondered who were and why they were there without any previous notification. Nifrim introduced himself and explained that Dear Lord had got the official papers from the Imperial family. So why was there a reason they couldn't come? After the words of that young bastard, he was all on the nerves. It occurred that this association came to crush the core of the Ancient. Lord was interested in the exact date when they would be going. Nifrim explained that they would depart the next day after visiting the Magic Tower wing for some kind of reason. To tell the truth, Nifrim just wanted to kill them all. Lord couldn't understand what the boy meant. Nifrim said something about the earldom's security being too flimsy because eavesdropping with magic was too easy. Definitely, they came to that border for subjugation, but they needed to get rid of everyone who'd be a disturbance. In conclusion, Lord apologized for his lapse, and also he wouldn't request any other group, and they could start whenever they wished. Patrick, at the same time, was getting ready for the intruders to arrive any second. Swallow and Miles continued their trip and asked the city guardians how to get to the teleportation hub. The hub was located in a castle right outside the Imperial Palace, so they had to go a while longer, and it might take at least a week. Both monsters were shocked to hear such news. Swallow understood that he would be too late. At this rate, he should forget about finding Renee, and Patrick would run away from home. Mal suggested using flying magic, but in the case of letting their mana out, they would be found out by humans. An old man approached them and asked if they were looking for the way to the hub. He introduced himself as flying coachman Belvier. His flying carriage looked durable enough and harnessed to an abandoned 4th-generation homunculus. Also, a ride would only take 3 hours. Swallow was interested in such an opportunity and asked about the price. The result shocked both of the monsters. 8 ounces of gold for 2 passengers. Mels didn't have such a sum of money. Swallow began to fish around in his pockets. Luckily, he found a note for a clumsy boss from Patrick with a few gold coins. The deal was successful, and 2 great monsters were having some rest inside the cabin. Mels asked who gave him the money. He mentioned that an associate from the dungeon secretly gave it to him. The girl wondered about this fact and asked if he was looking for another associate from the same dungeon. Mel's wished to have the same colleagues as well and live a life as he did, when she could have someone to take care of you and vice versa. Sadly, it occurred that the teleport wasn't permanently working. The worker mentioned that they could come back around the evening. The hub had been shut down to ensure the security of the auction. Swallow wanted to take a look at the newspaper to see which rare item was going to be exhibited at it. The beheading fang, which had unknown whereabouts for a long time, suddenly had been put on a display a few days ago. Swallow slowly understood that he had seen this object before, as his associate used it. Only one beheading fang exists in the entire world, and it was definitely Renee's weapon. But why is that in the human hands? She couldn't be in human hands. Even bosses of the other 7 malevolent dungeons couldn't mess with her easily. Swallow tried to remember if Renee was holding a blade when she had left the core, but she was wearing frilly clothes that didn't even have pockets to hide weapons. It was common truth that Patrick was strong without a sword, but the last one made him even better. Sadly, Renee is different. If the blades are taken from the blade maid, what will be left of her? Lord Swald was getting more and more overwhelmed with anger. A poor worker was screaming to the monster not to come any closer, but Boss Swald had another plan. If Renee was killed by mere humans, then it would only be right for him to kill every last bastard there. Mel's asked what in the world was happening. Swallow turned around and asked if there was only one in the whole world beheading Fang, one of the 36 virtuous masterpieces. The girl was very nervous, but answered that, according to the principles she knew, it was true. Mel's was curious about why he had asked all of a sudden. Lord answered that he had been looking for it because that item belonged to his friend. Also, she shouldn't help him anymore. Demon King grabbed him and wondered what was happening. Swallow said that now he knew the way back to Harston and it would be best if she got out of there as fast as possible. Merles asked, was that person the demon that takes the form of a silver-haired woman, a warrior who wields the beheading fang of the 36 virtuous masterpieces? The blade maid lady Renee. Based on his reaction, Mel's was right. Lord screamed that it was enough with provocations and how much she wanted to know. Demon King was laughing. She didn't need him to tell the whole story. Even if he used that vicious voice, he couldn't scare her, especially since she had already figured out who he was. Lady Renee was the guardian that protected the great core of the Ancient. So if he claimed that Lady Renee was his friend, he should be the master of core of the Ancient, the great Lord Swallow. Soon enough, he admitted this fact. Now Mel's was extremely happy and proud of her supreme deduction skills. She knew exactly what kind of dangerous thoughts were crossing his mind at that moment. That's why she would help him, and he wouldn't object. Swallow wondered that for someone who claimed to be nearly on the level of the Demon King, was Mel sure she could go off of such simple reasoning? The girl was glad that Lord Swallow came back to his normal self. She would assist him from that moment so he shouldn't worry at all. Demon King also asked him kindly not to use that scary voice to say such things. At this moment, but inside of the royal building, auction was taking place. A lot of guests were coming to try their luck and purchase the legendary object. Meltz and Swald met the Guardian and informed him that they were looking for a way to join the auction. The man was stunned. Guardian asked them first to identify themselves so he could check the guest list. They've told the Guardian that the woman was of House Agrea and the man was her attendant Swald. It occurred that they were not on the guest list, but Swald had invitations. But suddenly Guardian understood that there was nothing sent to guests. Lord Swallow pushed the Guardian straight into his face and said that it was his invitation to the afterlife. Mr. referred to Mel's and asked if could she wear something different. The girl asked if he was afraid to be charmed by her fabulous self. At the same time at the Shate Castle, Renee was crying and thinking that she could no longer return to the core of the Ancient. 80 years ago at the Grapinia Forest, something weird was going on. Earth Spirit. Grapinia, an owner of forest, was furious that humans made such a bold thing with her home. The protagonist, on the other hand, returned the favor to them. The core had always used the forest as a natural fortress, so he should make a good impression on Grapinia. Luckily, all the humans who started the fire were dead. In that case, the anger of the witch would gradually subside. But what should he do with the creature that seems unrelated to that case? The more he looked at it, the more intrigued he became, even though he knew it was called homunculus, a non-human creature made a human. Maybe he should kill it as well. It won't do any good leaving witnesses, but he said that creature was free and could leave if she wanted. However, the protagonist found himself too capricious. Swallow broke the fence and gave her a chance to choose to die trapped here or outside. The decision was up to Lello. Her master was looking for a maid named this way, and since there were no other maids, it must be her. His mercy born of curiosity ended there. The little girl was left all alone. Lello was the name of a maid who served as the head of her household, and a title used to address the most talented maid. The current creature was a middle-aged head maid, and this homunculus had never been called nor addressed by that name, because objects like her didn't have names. Yet she was Lello. But now, Renee was staying at the Chate Castle. Miss Bathory said that the subjugation party sent by the Empire was heading towards the core of the Ancient. even if Madame Erzabet was saying that Renee wouldn't go back to that place. The woman explained that she valued Renee's happiness, but prioritized choice and freedom much more. Shouldn't Maid made sure that she has settled all of her problems? Bathory explained that those two would look for her everywhere, and if they found out that she was tricked by a human and ended up like, it was hard even to imagine what Swallow and Patrick would do afterwards. If Renee was really going to keep living in the shadows, then she must erase all of her tracks. She shouldn't do that perfectly. Patrick would know her intentions and take care of it. If she indeed plans to tie the knots, it had to be done at that moment. Renee informed Bathory that she was going somewhere far away to get some fresh air. Madame Erzabet noticed her right eye getting blurry. Was it really okay for her to go alone? Renee thanked her friend for her concern and asked herself where was her blade. Meanwhile, Lord Swallow was torturing the worker of the palace so he would tell him everything about the beheading Fang. It occurred that the Harston Magic Tower Wing submitted that item. He freed the poor man and let him live a long life because he told the truth. The man began whispering to himself. What did he do wrong so those bastards almost killed him? Swallow bent down to him and was full of anger. He said that the Guardian had done nothing wrong. He just happened to catch the Lord's attention, unfortunately. Poor Guardian understood that he was facing a furious monster at that moment. Those mere humans never felt sorry for killing monsters. Did they even do anything wrong to get killed at all? So now it was the same for him too. Nevertheless, the auction was in full swing. People were trying to pay enormous sums of money just to get a legendary blade. Two main Guardians were really bored and wanted to join the bidding as well and do that only for fun. Tracker Garat, who was a Black Tiger's Order executive hero, told her partner that they were there for auction security, not to participate. Wu and Historia understood that she shouldn't joke around Garat, but still, she was only thinking about finishing this and having something delicious to eat. The anchorman wanted to close the bidding on number 3, but something bad began to happen. Swallow entered the hall and said that he would be the one ending that auction. At that time, there were 3 heroes of the Empire. After one of the 3, Baron Hishtaltz, died in the core of the Ancient, public criticism arose that a hero with a duty to protect the people died while attacking a dungeon out of personal interest. People couldn't blame the dead Byrne. They pointed fingers at the 2 heroes who remained. Out of the 2, one felt that as a hero it was necessary to instill the people of the Empire with trust, enough to suppress their survival instinct and set flame to fighting spirit. Garrett stopped Historia and said that she couldn't go. That thing was far too dangerous. Lord Swallow finally found the display stand with a blade inside. Of course, everything was just a hunch. But he could feel Renee's traces emanating too strongly to call that weapon a fake. And as expected, his maid was in dirty hands of the humans. Swallow explained to the crowd that the item actually had an owner already, so he would return it back and it would be a shame to sell it for a high price. People from the crowd were blaming the guard for doing nothing to that intruder. Lord said that he was going to rip all of them to pieces and bury them with that blade for everything they've done to the monsters. Historia screamed if he really thought that she would allow that. Swallow thought about that fast-flying squirrel. Decent movement paired with decent battle gear, but unfortunately had no talent for that. Also, that girl had no other weapon besides those gauntlets. In that case, he would definitely grab that hand of hers and smash those gauntlets to pieces. Even still, for a human that was quite impressive. Her powerful crash would definitely injure someone much weaker, but not him. Historia couldn't believe that her opponent was still alive, but that couldn't be so. Her technique destroys most dungeon bosses without even leaving any traces. Even her armor was said to easily withstand any 3 blows. Was destroyed by a single blow from that unknown creature who stole one of 36 masterpieces. Black fluid, maybe gas. Definitely, Wuan was facing not a human, but that man was not an ordinary monster either. Swallow enjoyed everything going on around. For too long time he was staying inactive, and now he could try his power on those heroes. Garrett was running to help Wuan and asked to get out of the way. Luckily, everything ended, and Mel's found Mr. Swald and said that she was really worried about him. Demon King actually thought that he died a helpless death somewhere. Lord whispered that he wondered that he made it and was still alive. That attack from the girl with blue hair wasn't something that humans were capable of delivering. If something like that had hit his heart, he might have been so surprised that he wouldn't be able to undo his polymorph. And if that happened, Patrick would do horrible things to him. It was the protagonist's worst nightmare, and he would probably take death over that. But the most important is the fact that he missed everyone from his dungeon. Still, there was not only one flying squirrel. That redhead especially stayed in his memory. While Swallow was distracted by blue hair, another one evacuated people. She cast several layers of protection magic for her friend and escaped the clutches of his magic at the same time. For Lord, it was quite interesting. The city was in a disaster situation. Everyone was shocked. One of the heroes was severely injured. Even though Historia was a warrior, she was defeated by an unknown monster with a single strike. Wuan was worried about Garot's safety and those people from the auction. Another hero came up to her and asked to stand up carefully. Historia was delighted that her friend was alive. Garrett said that Miss Wooin should thank her quickly, because if she wasn't there, they would be preparing for her funeral. Only now Historia noticed that Garrett had lost her arm in the battle with that creature. The girl instantly began crying and saying that it happened only because of her and she was a failure, not a hero. Garrett ordered her to keep quiet. Of course, everyone would be happy to see a hero of the Empire cry their eyes out. And also, didn't she know who she was up against? That monster was the core of the ancient swallow. Wooin couldn't believe it and thought she was making fun of her. There's no way a monster like him would come here. Garrett didn't know a reason either, but she was certain that Black Calamity was the ancient monster swallow. Also on that monster's foot were fresh traces of hero burn that were less than a month old. Everything was more serious than they thought. If that continues, the Empire might fall because this exact monster is far too powerful. Wooin said that they should make more efforts to stop him now. That lands belong to humans and monsters are not allowed to do everything they want there. Historia was too nervous about it. Garrett tried to calm her down because that was not something they could figure out with their strength, and both of them felt that immense power. The redhead healed her friend and asked her to stay there until she came back to her, while Garrot brought some more help from the Empire. Swallow was wondering what should he do. Since he safely recovered the beheading fang, he wanted to just leave that place. Moreover, he had a goal he mustn't forget about. Swallow should at least find Renee's body. The protagonist told Mel's to prepare. But the Demon King seemed too gloomy. The girl explained that nothing was wrong. Swallow insisted that it didn't look like it was nothing. The girl couldn't resist his power and answered. Mr. Swald was truly strong. She thought she had known it due to what she had seen at the Demon King's castle. But now it seemed like he was much stronger than she expected. She was begging him to tell her who he really was. Swallow slightly pushed her head and asked why in the world she was depressed over something like that. He was just a Sir Swald, her friend. Once everything is taken care of, he would tell her all of the truth. But now they should finish things, and she must show those humans a true Demon King's power. Now Mel's was in the mood to help him with such an important plan. She used a spell of reconstruction on that town, and a few blocks were destroyed immediately. Citizens couldn't even understand what was going on around them. Why did the explosion happen? Historia noticed that the smog was coming from the direction where was Auction House located. How could it happen in the middle of the capital? She was thinking if those damn creatures knew how many people were in the capital. And what should she do now? Garrett asked her not to roam around and wait for her, so she was in a difficult situation. Suddenly, little girl touched her hand and said that her dad was over there. It was the final straw for Historia. She said loudly that Wu and Historia would take care of everything and wouldn't avoid a monster like that. Swald got rid of parts of the house and asked Mel's what kind of magic she used just now. It was called reconstruction, a high-ranking magic that caused the ground to collapse. Lord wondered did she really had nothing else to use in that situation. Mel said that he couldn't blame her for that, because he started posing and said to finish things, so she used the most stylish magic. If he had been going to complain, he should have told her specifically what to use, but on that point, their argument was over. Swallow understood that things were getting more complicated. He asked Mel's if she remembered the way to that hub. Swallow asked her to go there and take care of it since the humans would definitely be blocking that way. He wanted to finish everything here as soon as possible and come back to Harston, which is the closest town to the core of the Ancient. Mel's was really excited to go to his dungeon because it was her favorite, and she only knew about it from the books. The girl promised Sir Swald that she would take a great care of the hub. Lord has already seen his enemies and wondered how many people would be there. Men said that they were of the Language Blue Crane subjugation team, and they were asking their opponent who he was. Swallow couldn't understand why they were so busy getting into formation, and all humans were like that. He said that if they wanted to know, so they should accept that he was their enemy. At the same time, some intruders came to the core of the Ancient. They were talking about rumors that whoever enters that cave never returns alive. The girl was making fun of Nifrim, saying that it wasn't too late to turn back yet, but the man asked Sylvia not to mess around. It was too boring for her and nothing was going on around, even no sight of monsters. But there was one strange moment when the first room they came across was full of monster corpses, but the next one was too clean. As if someone was cleaning it. Nifrim asked everyone else what did they think about it. Warriors were leaning towards the option that it was cleaned by a monster with intelligence. But to think logically, why would a monster clean up a fellow monster's corpse in the first place? After such thoughts, Nifrim got on the nerves and screamed into the darkness. He asked a monster not to play those stupid pranks. The voice from the darkness said that he was so loud that it made his ribs echo. Someone was saying that he just cleaned up everything, hearing that the guests were coming. Nifrim ordered Sylvia to light up the room to understand who was their companion. Patrick welcomed them after saying that they worked so hard getting to such a rare place, even though they weren't invited. The hero instantly understood that it was the Death Knight Patrick. Skeleton was sad because he had prepared an introduction for himself, but it was pointless. He thanked those bastards angrily. Patrick said that their reaction was too savage. He asked everyone to calm down for a moment and put away weapons. He also referred to Miss Mage so she could put back her stuff. Skeleton wondered if he said something weird when Nifrim's knife was near his head. The boy was screaming that his bullshit would end here, but Patrick said that the guy had no manners. He didn't even give him time to breathe. Skeleton was commenting on everything and talking because he was too bored for a few last decades. Patrick added that he felt that every time. One versus all was definitely too much for him. Even though Patrick would win, of course. Skeleton called his new sword. For a mere human, that Nifrim was strong enough. The hero started to activate all of his omens, auras, and buffs. Patrick understood that the secret to his unreal strength was only buff magic. Wasn't that quite unreasonable? Of course, those buffs won't last long. The monster was hoping to stay alive for at least 1 minute versus Nifrim. The hero stood on his head and asked who would beat whom. That scene was really scary. Patrick laughed and commented that it was quite impressive. He never thought that his opponent would ever use magic to drive him into a corner. Poor Sylvia was worried if it had been already over. Was the core of the Ancient's Guardian not all that much? Nifrim ordered Skeleton to shut his mouth and hit him with a knife. Patrick stooped it right in front of his head and started laughing insanely. That was really fun for him. At that time, he was really immersed in his acting. Skeleton was sorry. He didn't really want to mess around at first, but he was too bored lately and also wanted to experience the feeling of the crisis once. He thanked everyone else as well for playing alone to his rhythm. Suddenly, Nifrim woke up and couldn't understand what had happened. Patrick wondered if he was already awake and said that it only took him just a few seconds to wrap things up after he collapsed, though it would be quicker for Nifrim to see everything by himself. Out of all the humans to have encountered Death Knight Patrick so far, not even one had ever survived. But still, that green-haired magician was quite challenging to deal with. He threw the body of Sylvia to Nifrim. Using wide-range divine magic made his bones itch just thinking about that. Anyway, that magician kept calling his name until the very end. The poor girl called for him so desperately. Of course, Patrick hoped for a more emotional reaction, but Nifrim's response was quite boring. Nevertheless, it was a time for QA session. Honestly, the subjugation party was subpar, so Skeleton wanted to know, what was Nifrim hiding? Since he was very kind and generous Skeleton, he was going to offer him some choices. If he was willing to answer, he should raise his right hand, if not the other. The boy made a wise choice. Skeleton promised him a clean and painless death if he told him everything. But something unexpected happened, and Nifrim sent him far and far away. Skeleton couldn't believe that he would be cussed in that way as well, but he respects the decisions of his victims and makes them die slowly. Patrick decided to clean up a bit later and hoped that it would be easier than before. Nifrim patiently waited when the monster would go away. He was really sorry to Sylvia, but he had his personal reasons. Nifrim wanted to live. Sounds of smacking and crunching filled up the whole cave. Patrick wondered what an unpleasant sound it was, but definitely, he knew there was something underneath the surface. Maybe eating corpses made him stronger and heal wounds. Since there were plenty of corpses, he should take his time testing this creature. Patrick wondered what was his boss doing. He hoped Lord Swallow hadn't done anything wrong out there. Skeleton wasn't right. The middle part of the capital was on fire, and Swallow was the only reason for it. The girl introduced herself as Wuin Historia, a well-known hero of the Empire. Monster asked if she was here to die as well. He did like her spirit, but she wouldn't defeat him. Even if it was true, she had to stop him. Swallow grabbed her hand and said that she would only be able to land one attack on him. Of course, she could try to escape again, but still, he wouldn't allow that. Wuin couldn't defeat him, no matter how hard she tried. But still, the poor girl bought some time for people. Swallow couldn't understand if it was really over. The girl continued to repeat that she was the hero, and she couldn't go down like that. And she wouldn't allow him to get to her people. Historia was furious with her attacks on him, but she didn't have enough power even to hit him. Swallow congratulated her because the girl didn't die in vain. He would remember her name, but was not sure for how long. He would try to give her a painless death. Suddenly, something hit him in the back. Swallow turned back and asked those guys if they were sausages. Warriors explained that they took drastic measures to save Miss Wuin, and they begged for forgiveness of their rude actions. The person decided to introduce herself and offer greetings however late they may be. She was a member of Ethelbrecht's Black Tiger Order and was honored to meet the almighty Lord Swallow. That woman just called him Lord Swaslow, but how did she know? Commander explained that she just had a talented person under her command, who was able to recognize him. Swallow knew about her hiding something after that smile. Monster explained that he was quite in a bad mood at that moment, and they were wasting his time. If they were planning to attack him after running their mouth, it would be better to get it over. The woman explained that he was mistaken and they would not dare to do that. They had no intention of fighting against the Great Swallow. They had simply come to offer a deal. Lord was getting more and more furious. Did those mere people want to offer a deal to someone who had nothing to regret? Swallow advised them better read the situation very carefully. If they dared to insult him, they wouldn't die an easy death. Lord threatened them professionally with his demonical voice. Women understood that it was a gamble with the safety of the Empire on the line. She said loudly that the owner of Beheading Fang was still alive. Commander assumed he didn't come all the way just to retrieve Virtuous Masterpiece, and they came to offer him help. Swallow asked what if he came to get a blade just because he was bored and wanted to exterminate all humans in addition. What would they do then? Commander said that if he was always going to destroy everything in the end, then was that not worth a try? Swallow understood that they wanted to avoid destruction. Lord ordered her to find out immediately where the owner of that blade was. The woman explained that they would do as he commanded. She called for Garrett and mentioned that Swallow may have met that girl once. Garrett mentioned that she needed to look at the traces the person had left on the object. Swallow warned her not to do anything stupid or she wouldn't lose just one arm. The girl did her job as they agreed. The owner of the blade was moving west in the direction opposite to Lai's Imperial Paliseu. That was towards Harston. Such an amount of information was enough. Luckily, his dear Renee was still alive. Swallow said that he was in debt for those two and he would remember them. It was an honor for the commander to help him. After that, Ancient Monster found Mel's who was struggling with killing a lot of warriors. The Demon King said that he was a little late, but she upheld her promise and did well in defending the teleportation hub. Swallow instantly understood that it was too much for a little girl and she needed a lot of rest. He would also protect her peaceful rest. The protagonist's next task would be to understand how to use the hub, but when he infused his mana inside, it broke into pieces. Swallow was pretty confident since his polymorph was quite stable during his travel. Now, when there is only one way to get fast to Harston, Swallow has to use his polymorph. If he did that, he would announce his existence to everyone around. Lord was really nervous now. He screwed things up past the point of no return and it was too late to end things smoothly. Swallow was really sorry to Patrick. The coordinates were Harston Magic Tower Wings. At this time, Renee was welcomed to the tower. The Guardian mentioned that she needed to go through verification first, then enter. The maid took out her blades and said that he couldn't escape from her. When she got here for the first time, she thought that the humans' magic tower was similar to dungeons. Sure enough, they were basically dungeons made up of humans, who are just weak monsters. Renee had quickly killed all the humans she could find on the first floor. What was left was the top of the tower where she also was last time. Amr, who welcomed her, was wondering who the opponent was, but was that really the noble young girl from before? It occurred that she wasn't a human from the beginning. Renee asked the magician where was the beheading fang of hers. The woman explained that it had been her property already, and there was no point in telling where it was. But Amr was really curious how she was still alive. Renee was getting ready for the attack. The woman commented that she was carrying around a weapon that didn't match her cute face. The magician asked if the girl really thought that she could face her, the Magic Tower Guildmaster with nothing but a blade like that. Amr asked what she was going to do using a blade with no attributes. Renee kept silent. She was attacking her opponent all the time. But now the magician was afraid. She couldn't even understand how strong was that girl monster. Only if she uses all the mana in tower, Amr would definitely win. Renee screamed, so she hurried up and told her where was the blade. The magician explained that it was no longer in the tower, and it had been a while since she put it up for auction. Amr admitted that the girl was quite strong, so she would go all out from the start. The huge explosion in the tower was heard all around the town. Renee's entire body was pierced with daggers. The magician said this is what happens when a monster dares to pretend to be human. That was top-class magic that couldn't even be withstood by boss monsters. Amr was sure that there was no way someone like that girl could handle it. But suddenly Renee managed to cut off her both hands. The witch was screaming that it was too painful. Monster came up to the magician and said that she just cut her hands off and she'd better not make such a fuss of it. The woman was screaming so she should save her, but Renee didn't even care about her. For Renee, it was over. Her traces were erased. But what was left for her now, she was too tired. The man came up to the leader of the tower and started to take care of her, and also gave a look full of interest to Renee. He took out a mana stone that would allow her to escape from that place. Amr should activate it with her mana. Renee understood that it was the same thing that was in the love stone. How could she forget that unpleasant feeling? Something weird was happening. The man said that Amr had too many enemies, and how bad must it be for Ren to come and seek revenge? He was grateful to her for doing his job. The man said that at this rate Ren might come for him next time, but Renee didn't answer him. He said goodbye to her and left Renee all alone with that weird creature. Poor girl couldn't see in her eye anymore, and that wasn't an opponent she could beat with a completely battered body and without a proper weapon. But still, she wanted to pay the price here. Renee wanted to erase any trace of herself forever. She screamed to Amr that she dared to cover Lord Swallow's scent with those dirty hands. Renee barely attacked that creature at last and was pushed out. The poor girl was only thinking if Lord Swallow would be sad in case of her death. Luckily, he came just in time. He asked was his maid okay. When Renee was first saved, it was a similar situation to this. When her body and mind were sapped of strength when Renee couldn't find the meaning of life. The one who appeared before her was Lord Swallow. Swallow brought her body to the ground. The girl couldn't understand why he was there. Renee was quite shocked, but Lord asked her to wait a bit for him. Maid suggested that she might be in a delusion, but everything around seemed realistic to her. Lord Swallow was unbelievably furious. He approached that monster named Amr and asked how dare she was. In such a case, he would teach her a lesson not to mess with his people. But such trash creatures didn't know their place. Swallow fought it with his power mixed with rage. It was his most disgusting fight. But still, the creature continued to regenerate. Her source of power was the mana from Magic Tower Wing, and the task became easier. Swallow simply ate that creature who once was Amr. Sadly, the taste was quite awful. After the fight ended, he came up to Renee. There were a lot of things he wanted to say when he met her, but at the exact moment when he was around her, Swallow's mind went blank. He would have written it down if he knew that this would ever happen. Also, he was quite nervous around his maid. He also started to add a lot of random things and speak about his journey there. Swallow ended up saying that he was sorry for what he had done a few days ago. Renee was saying that he shouldn't be sorry. It was just her who didn't have the right to face the Lord. The great monster added that not only did the dungeon need the guardian named Renee, but he needed her especially. Renee asked if he resented or hated her, but Lord Swallow didn't feel anything from such a bad spectrum. Also, he had one more present for her. It was the item she left behind. The poor girl started to cry badly. She was really scared of being abandoned and hated by Lord Swallow. The ancient monster gave her a hand and promised not to abandon or hate her. He also wanted to go back home together. It was the first time the maid came to the core of the ancient. Swallow told Patrick that he met her during the previous arson case that happened in Gripenia, and then in the lab. That's why he decided to bring her along, since it seemed like fate. Skeleton wondered if that small body contained all the knowledge about homunculus research. Moreover, it was strange to see how the girl was completely unfazed inside the room of the strongest boss in the core of the ancient. It occurred that the girl had the mental strength and physique to handle anything. Patrick was wondering what the boss was going to do with that child. Swallow wanted to let her live there. It seemed to him that the girl had a lot of talents, so firstly they would teach her how to fight. But if teaching didn't seem to work, they would let her live in peace. But Lord was hoping she had enough experience as a maid, so she would be able to cook for them. Patrick asked if he was serious about this. Even if it was so, who was going to educate that child? Swallow wanted his skeleton to do that job for him. Patrick was really bored since he had nothing else to do. Skeleton knew that being a homunculus meant that her physical abilities would certainly be outstanding. He also asked the boss about her name. Lord didn't really remember it. The girl barely whispered that it was Lello. Patrick was shocked that she could talk like a normal human, but it was not enough for Dark Knight. He was worried that it was not enough for that pretty girl. And since the boss was the master, why wouldn't they make her a new name? Swallow considered naming her Renee. Patrick was glad, and since then she would be Renee Lello. Skeleton started by teaching her how to smile, but when Lord Swallow came back from his search for Renee, Skeleton angrily asked how could he even smile in such a situation? What was he doing in Harston to make the ground shake so much? Swallow said that he should know about exceptions in the monster's life. Patrick pointed at Mel's and asked what was the exception. Lord mentioned that it was quite a long story to tell. Skeleton was worried that the boss might have kidnapped the child, but Swallow convinced his guardian that he wouldn't do something troublesome like that. But now there was the main question from Skeleton. Why did boss bring that child instead of Renee? Swallow mentioned that he met her at a village. The girl looked too tired. Perhaps they were restricting and limiting her life all that time. Patrick told his boss not to express poetically that rejection of Renee. Swallow added new responsibilities for Skeleton. He would be wearing a maid costume and manage the whole dungeon. Patrick reminded boss that his resignation letter was always ready, but now they had nothing else to do since they didn't know when Renee would be back. Guardian decided to leave him alone for a while. It was quite difficult state and Swallow needed time. Suddenly Skeleton stopped and couldn't believe his eyes. He saw her. The one boss was waiting for the most. Renee asked if Lord Swallow had eaten already. Patrick also noticed something strange. He wondered if the boss really did that. Did Swallow finally go insane to give her? When the two met near the tower, Swallow knew that her right eye was completely ruined. If only she could see properly, she would be able to tell everything apart. He mentioned that, as he had said before, if she only had that heart still, she should look at it properly. And give him a real love stone next time. Renee was really happy because she would always be with Lord Swallow. Soon enough, Mel's woke up and couldn't understand where was she, and the first thing she saw was a skeleton sharpening daggers right in front of her. Mel's thought she was dead. The girl was trembling and asking if he was the Grim Reaper and if was it hell. Patrick explained that it wasn't that kind of place. But when the girl heard that it was the core of the ancient, she could barely hold her excitement. She instantly understood that it was a Dark Knight Patrick in front of her. Skeleton added that he didn't know when the boss would wake up, and punched him properly to speed up the process. Swallow wasn't really happy with that, because he was having a nice nap. But when boss noticed the girl being awake, his mood changed. Mel's fell to his knees and started murmuring about Lord Swallow being the embodiment of all things, the guardian of God and many other things. Meanwhile, Patrick was laughing. She also apologized for not introducing herself to him. She repeated once again about being the 17th descendant of Demon King. Boss mentioned that he had already memorized it. Mel's wondered how he knew her name. Maybe Sir. Swald told him about it. Also, she asked where that man was because she remembered him pushing the humans in Laiz and retrieving the beheading fang. Monster explained that he was that Sir Swald, just an original look. Mel's couldn't believe her ears. Only now did she understand how much disgrace she had shown toward Lord Swallow. But Patrick asked about the words Demon King said about the topic of punishing the humans in Laiz, what he hadn't told him yet. At this time, somewhere in Grapenia Forest, that weird creature Nifrim was beating for his life. He was eating all of the herbs around just to stay alive. Each dungeon is the battlefield. To survive on it, there are several virtues one must possess, and one of those is maintaining a minimum level of tension inside. Renee was screaming at Mel's because she wasn't obedient to the rules. The basic one in Lord Swallow's room was silence. The girl refused all the time because she was a free dungeon monster. Those two were arguing all the time, and frequently the reason was Swallow's attention. Mel's turned into a woman and said that she was needed to stick close and share her warmth by the Lord's side. And Renee was too conservative in that aspect, too inflexible like a boomer. These words drove her mad. Renee couldn't believe that Mel's would call her a boomer. Blade's maid was furious and was ready to commit a murder, but it was extreme fun for Mel's. For Patrick and Swallow, it was like hell. The boss couldn't sleep because of the noise, and Skeleton said that thanks to him outside of the dungeon was in the same chaos. Lord asked if that was really bad in the Empire. Skeleton asked if he hadn't read any of the newspapers he gave him. Patrick explained that due to the forcefully mobilizing of troops to strengthen capital's defense, villages on the borders were being devastated by monsters. Also, the Lord of Harston committed suicide, and as a result, the city was completely paralyzed. Skeleton did a great job during the last few days, but still, he found only 3 articles related to Harston. Boss didn't know what that meant, and it made Guardian angry again. His boss never thinks about important things. Patrick was ready to give him a resignation letter at any moment. But Swallow was really sorry. They decided to discuss their future actions. Skeleton bet on Harston being cut off from all interactions with the outside. In any case, the core of the Ancient needed Harston. Since they can keep an eye on them, they would be able to know the size of the subjugation party and when they would challenge them. Patrick wanted to hurry up and head to the Harston. If they wait any longer, only God would know what would happen next. Swallow wished a safe trip to him and asked him not to push himself too hard. In his mind, he hoped Skeleton would go all alone. Patrick stood up and said that he would come as soon as possible. Swallow couldn't believe how lucky he was and hoped for some more sleep. But the storm wasn't over. Skeleton asked loudly, wouldn't it be too tough even for him to go alone? It would be better if at least one person came along with him. Swallow stopped the girls and tried to solve the problem the fastest way possible. Candidate number 1 asked what was wrong. Swallow started thinking. Mel's was dangerous and could be compared to explosion magic. If she uses any of her magic, any village would be forever gone. Then he paid attention to candidate number 2. Renee was like super explosion magic. Staying in the dungeon was still helping, so she hoped she would like to be at home. Patrick intruded and said if he was uncertain of those two, maybe the boss would accompany him on the mission. Swallow remembered getting caught in his trap, yet he still hoped to stay home. The ancient monster argued that he couldn't use polymorphism because he had broken the magical bracelet that restrained his mana. Patrick felt a bit sad, but agreed that without that item, his boss couldn't join him on the trip. Swallow was unbelievably happy that it worked with his guardian, and that he would finally have enough time to sleep. But still, it didn't work with his death knight. The boss promised him the most painful death. Skeleton mentioned that no curses would work on him, and regrettably, informed his boss that his favorite guardian was already dead. Yet the guardian told Swallow that, in other words, if the boss had it, then he would be able to go with him right away. Sadly, Patrick was indeed right. Soon enough, they came to Harston. Skeleton admitted that boss made that place a bit different and a bit messier. Patrick also told him about 3 simple ways to know how active is a human village. Firstly, they needed to see how crowded the market was in the city center. Swallow commented that there was no one in Harston and that he wanted to go back. Skeleton didn't listen to him and mentioned the second factor. The amount of smoke from the chimneys indicated how active the village was, but they were too late to check it because everyone was getting ready for sleep there. Lastly, they've got into the pub. Usually at any time such places are crowded. Patrick wanted to advise him not to expect too much, but Swallow entered and asked the host if there were any rooms available. But Skeleton understood that it was the worst situation possible. The village was not functioning like a normal one at all. In front of thousands of dead men, there was someone still unknown. The man was saying that everyone had worked really hard. And after they would get through Harston, they would go to the Empire's capital Laiz, the heart of their enemy's territory. Humanity became weaker than ever in the face of Black Calamity, making it the most suitable time for them to destroy the Empire. Patrick emphasized that it was kind of serious. Now it looked like Harston had been completely isolated. Suddenly the owner of the place approached them and asked who they were and for what reason they'd come. The man was nervous and held the gun behind his back. Patrick explained that he was a knight from the subjugation team and they require a simple meal and a place to relieve their fatigue. The owner understood that those two were customers, and he was sorry about everything because they had no food to serve, and in fact, there was nowhere in the village where they could find a place to eat. Patrick wondered if it was because of the Black Calamity. It was a relief for the owner that the knight knew about it. The man only asked for understanding in such a difficult situation. It was a time when the price of water was more expensive than the cost of lodging. Skeleton gave him a golden coin and asked if the rooms were still not ready for them. The host asked them to come upstairs and wondered who was the person following the knight. Patrick explained that it was his slave, who had been a great help to him, so he treated the poor creature quite well. That's why his slave could stay in the same room with him. Swallow enjoyed their temporary shelter because it was much better than he was expecting. The only thing the ancient mobster was thinking about was a good nap, while Patrick was placing some of his items inside different shelves. Then he decided to step out for a moment and let his slave rest. Also, he asked the boss not to worry too much about him. The Black Calamity descended upon the main square of Harston, causing the Imperial family to become furious about the attack. They likely needed someone to take responsibility for their repeated failures in subduing the Ancients' core. However, before the Empire extended its reach here, Harston's lord died. It was everything Patrick was thinking about while carefully studying the destroyed tower. And also he was quite curious about the new lord of Harston, because the royal family lost their chance. The opportunity now was in the hands of Count Etarch's descendants. Skeleton now went to see the new face of Harston's lord. Patrick had a specific place in his mind when he came here. Unlike humans, he could sense a strong, lingering scent of corpses. While Swallow was enjoying his nice sleep in that pub, someone knocked on the door and asked if Sir Knight was inside. The owner explained that he had served a meal a little earlier and wanted him at least to come downstairs. Man said he shouldn't starve his customers, and since the knight paid well, he felt he must repay him. Also, those two introduced themselves to each other. Novan hoped Swald wouldn't be too disappointed given the limited food available. The monster asked if things were really that bad in Harston. The owner explained that the name suggests that it was literally a calamity. Most of the residents who saw it with their own eyes immediately lost their minds. The lord committed suicide as soon as it happened, and after that event, all traffic to Harston was cut off. Novan noted that beyond the castle walls, the streets were lined with the corpses of the starved. Unsure why anyone would visit such a place, he advised them to leave as soon as possible, mentioning that he planned to do the same. He also added that Swald should know what happened to people when they were cornered. Simultaneously, a girl got into Swallow's room from the window. She knew for sure that outsiders were living there, and moreover, that was the most expensive room in the inn. So they were definitely people with a ton of money. The girl hoped to earn a bit of profit from that robbery. Redhead decided to take everything she could sell for money. But Swallow's coat seemed too disgusting, and doubts began to corrupt her mind that customers weren't even reach. The thief also found the chest where money was usually kept empty, which alerted her that something was wrong. She couldn't believe they'd taken everything and left, so the girl started to look everywhere for their personal things. The little thief found something very interesting, but it disturbed her right away. Soon enough, both Swallow and Patrick came back to the room. Skeleton told the boss that he went for a quick peek at the Lord's castle. He returned empty-handed because of tight security around that place, and asked if the boss had any new information. Swallow pleasantly surprised his guardian with the news that the village had been cut off from the outside world, and even the inn owner knew little about Harston's current state. Patrick was delighted, and decided to learn more about that the next day with his boss. Sadly, Swallow wanted only to sleep. The skeleton advised keeping the windows closed as much as possible to avoid being robbed. But something wasn't right already. Swallow's coat was gone, which was actually made by Renee for him. Skeleton looked through everything and admitted that his stuff was gone as well. The boss asked what was stolen from him, and apparently it was his rib. At this time, their thief ran far away from the inn and hoped that it would be good enough. Rosalina was met by her friend, who asked where had she been at such a late hour. Apparently, the girl had been told many times not to wander around when it was getting dark, but the young blood still craved some excitement. Rosalina tried to convince him that it was made for the sake of everyone, but her friend said that it was a pointless usage of her stamina. Suddenly, the boss came over to them and asked Toth not to be that harsh. According to him, real thieves shouldn't fear the dark, and that was not something to get angry over. However, for Rosalina as well, it was a mistake to wander around without saying a word. The situation there was turbulent enough, so it was better to keep safe. That place was a lot different from the old house that embraced her so warmly. The girl was sorry and promised to be careful from that moment. Finally, the boss asked what she exactly brought to them. Rosalind happily showed her catch. It was clearly stolen from someone, and the girl noticed that it felt like she had to pull her own weight as well. The boss looked even gloomier after seeing what she had brought. Rosalina said it was found in a very expensive room, stored in a drawer. The girl hoped it was an expensive artifact. Man told her that it was a human bone. The little thief was scared and began to prove that she hadn't known about it. Toth asked if maybe she robbed a grave by mistake, but the boss stood up for her because otherwise she wouldn't have shown it off so proudly. Men started to consult what this bone could have been used for and if anyone was collecting it. Sadly, at that time, the world was overflowing with rotten trash who used slaves' bodies to make ornaments from them. They couldn't be sure. That might be a human's bone, or it could belong to someone who used to be a human. But if by any chance it belonged to someone studying necromancy or black magic, then it would be even more dangerous for their safety. Everything was suspicious, not to mention the clothes, which looked shabby, but the fabric used was of the highest quality. But in the pockets, there was a big amount of money. The boss was shocked. He also mentioned that it wasn't time to be happy. Customers staying at a luxury inn in a crumbling village, he should have noticed it sooner. A human rib, along with luxurious clothing and a large quantity of gold coins. They had meddled with something they should never have trifled with. Suddenly, Swallow and Patrick approached the thieves and announced they'd come to collect their things back. They were really looking forward to seeing them all. Swallow noticed that everything was fine with their items and prayed that he survived. It was also a huge relief for Patrick. If only Renee gets upset one more time, he wasn't even sure what would happen. The band's boss asked how did they find them. Patrick wondered and said that those items seemed to be yearning for their owners. Swallow complained that he was too tired already. Skeleton said that the boss of the back alley chose the wrong people to steal from, and it wasn't too late to politely return everything. The man wanted assurance that they would just leave after that. It was also a strange situation. Even if those two would follow Rosalina's tracks, they would find them too quickly, given how dark it was. Such a trick would be absolutely impossible unless those two were monsters. The boss was sure enough that it was black magic. The boss asked those two if they were beings who lived in the dark. Skeleton answered that the cave was quite dark. His worst expectations came true. The man gave Rosalina that rib bone and said tonight that it might be important to him. Patrick confirmed that it was his part of the body. The boss was trying to sweet-talk them, but the skeleton asked not to waste the time and give the bones back. The man tossed those into the air and ordered his people to evacuate themselves. Patrick made a nice catch. But the happiness didn't last for long because someone was trying to attack him. The aggressor couldn't understand why he wasn't taking any damage at all. Swallow wondered how bad the situation was in the village if they were trying to attack a knight with a stone. He caught with ease another one, who was trying to kill him and asked if they had any proper weapons and consulted with Patrick on what to do with those. Patrick proposed to knock all of them out. Both monsters apparently succeeded in such a task, because if anyone tries their best, it will surely work out. At that time, in the core of the ancient Mels and Renee were talking about how Lord Swallow was doing in the outside world. It was half a day since they had left. Renee was wondering if it was really okay for them to enjoy that rest by themselves when the Lord may be starving. Mels emphasized that she was worrying too much and it was irritating her as well. Simultaneously, those ancient monsters got rid of everyone who was attacking them and got back their priceless stuff. Patrick said that the boss was quite impressive for a human and could surprise him for a moment there. Skeleton wanted to deal with everything as soon as possible and asked boss for advice. Swallow had already made himself as comfortable as possible and invited to join. But Death Knight was desperate because his boss was too unreliable. Suddenly, the redhead came up to them. She started to murmur something through tears. The girl was really sorry, and anyone beside her had nothing to do with the steal. She begged them not to touch her people. Toth took Rosalina away, saying that those bastards wouldn't let them off so easily. The protagonist asked his guardian to sort it out for him. The frightened man pulled out a knife and warned him not to come any closer, or he would kill him. But Patrick was all eyes on Rosalia, who was praying with a figure in her hands. He came closer to her and wondered where did she get that from. A rosary in the shape of an upside-down phoenix represented an inverted cross. But the mana flowing from there was surveillance. Instantly, he told Swallow that the residents of Harston were being watched by someone. After the girl prayed while holding it released mana. That means that the rosary activates under certain conditions. If they discover them, it will lead them to its owner. Swallow noticed that Harston wasn't even a village of magic. Last time it was the monastones, and now it was an item imbued with magic. Skeleton said that for now, they would change their approach to working with humans. That's why he hoped for boss cooperation. Lord wondered how his guardian was going to deal with that situation. Patrick said that he had thought of an amazing solution for it. He gathered all of the people around him and announced that he was sorry for what happened before. He was under imperial order to not leave any trace of those who stirred up the trouble. Patrick mentioned that they were part of the imperial family's personal organization, the Shadow Knights of Roano's Mist. Skeleton had perfectly prepared stories for any situation. People were confused about what reason a knight came to Harston. Skeleton also mentioned that they had no intention of harming them now. He announced that they'd come there to save Harston. Patrick said that the only reason he disobeyed the Imperial Order and saved all of them just because he needed truthful information. He needed details to understand the situation quickly and determine problems, which was why he requested supplies from them and the relief efforts Harston needed. Skeleton asked people if they wanted to bring back peace to the village with him. Everyone began to consult and discuss the opportunity. The thought that His Majesty hadn't abandoned them made people feel more hopeful. Citizens decided to help the knights because with their help they would be able to build a new life there. Patrick informed Lord Swallow that he had finished convincing them and that those humans were too easy. The ancient monster asked if they were going back then. Sadly, it was just the beginning of the story. In that village, not only one or two things were suspicious. Of course, Swallow appreciated Patrick's efforts, but it looked like the scale of the incident had increased. Hadn't things just gotten annoyed because of him? The skeleton asked him not to lie down on the floor again. Once things had reached that point, the boss would need to work as well. While Patrick would take care of their leader still, he had some doubts that Swallow should stay with the humans and get along with them. Boss was shocked. In such a situation, it couldn't be helped. Swallow, who looked like a beggar, would appear friendlier to humans at a glance. Patrick advised him just to act like a human to become their friend and know more details about the situation. Swallow instantly got his mood back because normal humans spend half a day sleeping, and in their free time they mostly stroll around. This was exactly how the boss lived his normal life. The skeleton couldn't quite understand what he was murmuring and suggested that it still wouldn't be that easy. Patrick warned him not to forget to investigate the religion that distributed the rosary. He also had to gather as much information as possible from the humans. As soon as Swallow was left alone, that redhead Rosalina came up to him. She was really sorry for that steal. Ancient Monster said that it was all right since he got them back. Toth joined their conversation and explained that he was the deputy in charge of running the boss's place while he was away. From now on, he would assist the knight. The man emphasized that it would be quicker for him to see the village's real condition himself. If that was acceptable, he would guide him right away. Swallow got sad after hearing that because he didn't really want to go anywhere. But still, if he stayed, he would be certainly harassed by humans' ruthless questioning, so he had to choose from two misfortunes. Toth decided to show him the condition of the private residences first. Swallow noticed the unusual emptiness of the streets as well. The man remarked that as soon as he opened the door, he would understand. The people there starved to death. There was no food left. Even those who survived to that point didn't know when they would starve to death. Also, Swallow noticed that there had been something nagging at him from the beginning. Usually, when there is a famine, the villagers direct their anger at the Lord by taking up their weapons. And still, the Black Calamity was more than enough to cause a famine. Lord Swallow wondered why the residents of Harston had starved to death so helplessly. Now it was a main mystery. Toth added that it had been a month since the calamity struck them. The man wondered if Sir Knight wasn't curious about why the villagers had taken up their weapons and remained so quiet. At this time, the core of the Ancient was dead inside. Mel suffered from the wish she had gone to Harston with Lord Swallow, and now she was like staying behind in the dungeon. Renee said that she shouldn't think like that because Boss entrusted the dungeon to them, and what could be possibly more important than the protection of that place? That was the proof that they'd received his complete trust. But in her head, she named Mel's a thieving cat who wasn't trusted. Renee started to say that she should always be on guard because they never know when humans might invade. The Demon King asked her not to worry because she went on a patrol 10 minutes ago and has observing magic activated all the time. Suddenly, the spell started to inform its owner that someone had broken in, and it was likely that the intruder was alone. Renee ordered her to get ready immediately. The attackers were coming. The voice from the darkness asked what were they so tense for. Mel saw Renee's reaction and was shocked as well. Elizabeth Bathory asked if Renee had been doing well lately. Blade Maid was sorry for not welcoming her properly. She could have prepared something for such an occasion. Bathory asked her not to stress. After all, she was the one who had arrived unannounced, and if Renee wanted to offer her a warm welcome, she should give Elizabeth some of her blood. Madame was excited and asked who was the new face there. Mel's wondered if she was talking about her. Demon King quickly figured out what was going on and didn't miss her chance. Mel's introduced herself to Ancient Monster according to all the formalities. Renee intruded and said that Bathory was the boss monster of Chait Castle. Elizabeth was shocked to see a young Demon King. She also consulted with Renee if she could be able to see the faces of all malevolent dungeon bosses by staying in the core as a freeloader. Renee named her a joker and mentioned that she had no shame in saying that she would stay there for the rest of her life. Bathory wondered if Mel's wasn't a part of the core yet. Demon King answered that it was in process. Madame also asked where was the guy with no emotions, and Patrick. Renee informed her that they had stepped out for a bit. Elizabeth asked if those two left knowing what situation they were in. Her voice trembled and was strict. It seemed like the topic was really important. Renee wondered what had happened and why Madame Bathory was worried that much. Elizabeth informed them that the villages near Shate Castle were wiped out. Also, they were smeared with blood, so the humans most definitely died. But they found not even a single body. They all disappeared. It was definitely not the work of a human. The bloodstains on the ground all pointed in the same direction as if making a path. Mel suggested that it may be connected to the undead. Bathory said that she was right, but the number of people who could do such a thing was a lot smaller than it seemed. Most of those creatures possess no intellect. The few who do are known by the special title of Elder. So they came to the fact that the army of the undead was moving in unison meant only that someone was leading them. Erebos, the Lord of the Dead, the immortal king. Bathory suspected that it was that being. Renee and Mel's were speechless and couldn't believe how difficult the situation was. Sure, she didn't have definitive evidence, but still, Bathory wanted the emotionless guy to know about it. That's why it was important to deliver the message. Mel screamed that it was the perfect time for her to go and complete such a task. Toth started to tell Swallow the whole story, which began with the Black Calamity. Soon after it struck Harston, someone set a fire to a field. The crops that were about to be harvested were burnt to a crisp in that fire. There was nothing villagers could do to stop it. After that, some ugly rumors began to spread through the village. All the grains affected by the Black Calamity had been contaminated, and anyone who consumed them contracted a painful plague. And that was how Harston became a cursed land? Everyone there fell into despair. But even in it was hope. Toth mentioned a wealthy commoner couple that stepped forward with open arms. They hadn't suffered from the fire and opened their storehouses to distribute the provision to the residents. After such wonders, everyone wanted to survive with the help of joint work. Shortly after the moment everyone held their hopes high, the couple was found mutilated to death in their home. Someone who needed more food killed them, and after that, no one in the village trusted anyone. To avoid being stolen from all the citizens, locked themselves in their homes and starved to death. Fortunately, the people in the valley hadn't starved to death, but Toth was deeply concerned about rumors suggesting they would be safe even if they ate the contaminated grains. Swallow knew that grain hadn't come into contact with him, so there was no way it could be contaminated. It must be then a rumor spread with malicious intent. Soon they went to the next stop. They were observing the result of the complacency of residents who hoped to overcome the calamity quickly. Toth was telling Swallow everything important to gather enough information. The fact that corpses weren't cremated seemed weird to Ancient Monster. They've also discussed the possibility of setting a fire around those bodies and moved on. Nearby, the soldiers were guarding the door. Swallow supposed that they must be under the Lord's orders. Undoubtedly, Swallow, the ruler of the village, seemed too suspicious. The woman couldn't believe her eyes. Her brother made an irreparable mistake. He mentioned shortly before the death that she must live no matter what. Lady woke up crying from a nightmare. But she couldn't be left alone. The maid was worried about her mistress. The woman tried to pretend okay because she was Harston's Lord Lara Earthark. She went away to get some fresh air. It has been a few weeks since she became the Lord, but the picture of her brother's death was in her head all the time. Sadly, her family had fled with hordes of their wealth, and Harston was still yet to recover. For her, there was only one way to live in that situation. Lara wanted to bring that city back to life. That day, she called for her helper, who promised them salvation. He assured her of the protection of her life and the city's territories as well. The man said that she was right. Lara screamed into his face. The situation outside was devastating. Was that the salvation he promised her? He explained that he hadn't gone against his commitments. The man mentioned that soon all the problems would be resolved. That's why she did not need to worry. It was her total anxiety. That man never told her anything specific, but still, she had to do nothing but believe in him. Weir Person smiled and explained that everything was proceeding smoothly, and soon all of her problems would disappear. Suddenly, the maid interrupted them to notify her lady about some knight who appeared and stopped the attack of harpies by himself. Lady was interested in that person and wanted to know the details. Lara decided to meet him herself. The maid promised to guide him to the castle reception room. The man warned her to think about it very carefully, but he wouldn't admit being afraid that such an assassin would ruin his plans. Patrick introduced himself and told about his long journey to Harston. Also, he paid enough respect to the lord of the city. Lara was really grateful to him for protecting them. Skeleton secretly continued observing the situation. At first glance, that lady looked more like the previous lord's young sister. The dialogue continued, and depending on Lady's answers, he learned more about the current situation. He asked for food as compensation, and the woman asked without any hesitation. That meant that within the castle there was no shortage of food. Then why did the Lord allow the village to fall on such hard times? Not to mention that energy that he could feel because he was undead. He felt a strange sense of kinship to him. But Patrick didn't want to live in mysteries. He addressed the Lord and said that there was something that had been bothering him from the start. He referred to that weird man and asked who and what he was. After that, Patrick and Swallow finally met. Briefly, they've discussed the whole situation around. Swallow was interested in Skeleton's feeling of kinship to the weird man. Death Knight explained to him that just because he felt a sense of kinship, it didn't mean that man would be necessarily undead. Patrick considered different options that could explain such feelings, but Swallow couldn't understand his logic. He would beat that man up on the spot. Skeleton patiently reminded his boss that they were in Harston to solve the problem he caused, and now he was trying to destroy everything that had left as well. Then Patrick was interested in information Swallow found himself, and he had what to tell precisely about the situation with food and famine. But still, he wasn't able to build up a nice contact with that little thief Rosalina. The girl kept running away from him. Patrick admitted that it would have been nice if they at least learned some mind control magic. Or he should have brought Mel's instead. But still, they didn't have a lot of options. Patrick brought some food from the Lord with what they could win Rosalina's favor. Lord Swallow was completing such an important task. He came up to that redhead and asked her to come and split the food with him. The girl was surprised and delighted at the same time. Suddenly she understood that it was the same bread that the bishop was giving out. Swallow didn't understand exactly what Rosalina meant, but things were getting more and more interesting. The girl brought him to a new place. She was glad that they believed in that religion as well. Because no one around there except her believed in them, it seemed strange to Rosalina, especially after the bishop promised salvation to everyone just for truly believing in them. The redhead asked if Sir Swallow had the same mind about it, but the knight didn't answer her. Finally, they came to the strange cave and Rosalina mentioned that she got such an eerie feeling every time she went there. Inside, Bishop was telling that the calamity that befell Harston was an order given to humans for their evil deeds, and the one who caused it is an omnipotent being with the ability to transcend and exorcise all the orders, and those who have faith in him are all honorable, chosen people. People agreed with the statements of that strange bishop. Rosalina and Swallow came just in time. The man asked everyone to always remember the trust the god had placed in them, and on that day, they would also break the daily bread. Boss Monster wasn't surprised. Such things were just simple brainwashing. Rosalina encouraged the knight and added that it was time for communion, and they should take part as well. His Excellency Bishop started too? And Swallow noticed that it was the same as Patrick had received from the Lord earlier. He wondered how it occurred in the castle. Rosalina said to Sir Knight that when the bishop would save Harston, he promised to those with strong faith that they would enjoy eternal happiness. She also hoped to become closer to him, to receive an even more virtuous sacrament/ancient monster asked what it meant. The redhead started to explain it, but suddenly someone interrupted them. It was the bishop. He was glad that Rosalina came back again on that day. The weird man of religion said that it was the first time they'd met, and he hoped that the newcomer would continue coming in the future. But when the bishop was giving him bread, Swallow felt like something was wrong. Boss Monster asked what he was doing. The protagonist felt that the mana might not be visible to humans. Swallow came up closer to him and warned that he didn't care what he did to humans, but he shouldn't try anything on him without knowing his place. Bishop murmured that he wasn't a human. Swallow whispered that he was quite forgetful, but would definitely remember him. Rosalina asked, Sir Knight, what was happening? The protagonist explained that he was just thankful for the food and now they should go back. The girl left him, and Swallow started to think that he was too firm in his belief that he didn't even need any evidence. In this isolated town appeared the bishop with a false religion using unknown mana to brainwash and monitor people. In addition to that, there was also a guy who exuded the energy of the undead while beside the Lord. Even someone like him would be hard-pressed not to notice something that organized. Suddenly Mel's appeared in front of him and was shocked how did he know about her coming. Swallow was devastated that more annoying things for him to deal with had appeared. While Mel's was observing the mess Swallow had made, the protagonist mentioned that she didn't come there because that was what she was curious about. Demon King explained that Lord Bathory had visited the core of the Ancient and warned that the undead would attack Harston. Madame also mentioned about abnormal things discovered in Chait Castle. There were signs of heading towards Harston, and that wasn't all. They knew about the person who probably caused that. Is Erebos? The protagonist said that it was the most likely scenario, but still, it was just a guess at that point. Mel started to tell about her conjectures about undead stacking with a numbers advantage. She thought that they might be using the flow of mana, and sure, her predictions were right. At nighttime, the bishop came to the field of corpses and started to cast some black magic. He was the malevolent dungeon gatekeeper on the grounds of the corpse's demise, Lich Simon. His magic worked, and an outline of the person came up from the sky to him. Lord Erebos, the Lord of all dead, was glad to see his faithful servant. Bishop was ready to give Lord the final report before he arrived at Harston. The creature answered that he wouldn't forget his hardship. Simon Mouse explained that he was just doing his duty because he understood the bigger picture. Erebos asked him to tell him everything. There was an unexpected intruder, but suddenly the Lord of all Dead said that he had received the same report from Umel. Erebos wondered if the person he met was wearing a set of armor exuding the energy of the undead. But in the case of the bishop, the person he met was connected to a deep darkness. Lich asked if his lord had any guess who it could be. Erebos mentioned that there could be no way of that creature being active. The lord stated that they must first occupy Harston to acquire the empire despite any variables that arise. He advised his servant to be cautious. Mouse was ashamed of his inability to carry out the task he entrusted to him. Erebos added that he requested the reinforcement at the castle, so he sent Masham to the underground dungeon. At the sunrise, servant was left all alone and hoped that soon enough the dead would rule over everything on earth. And no matter who would come, they would no longer be able to stop them, as long as that monster didn't come. Simultaneously, Melz and Swallow were continuing their research. Boss Monster wanted her to find the person who cast that magic. Demon King explained that there was no way to know for sure, but for magic like that, it is common to choose the method of mana flow into the ground. In other words, to maintain the magic, the person who cast it should be nearby. Melz added that a huge chunk of mana should be nearby and showed a suitable place. The Lord's castle seemed the most suspicious to her. Swallow thought that even if they didn't know what they were up to, if they were to make a mess of everything, someone should come investigate. The protagonist mentioned that Patrick was over there as well, and he hoped that Melz wasn't busy. The girl agreed to come with him. Demon King was scared when she saw the face of the boss. Swallow announced that it was about time to replace one of the malevolent dungeons anyway. At that time as well, Patrick entered the most suspicious place of the whole Harston. The smell of the rotting corpses wafting from below was much stronger than the last time, and it was still too dubious. The underground dungeon was made useless in such a situation, but the noise from the inside was strange. As expected, Patrick met an odd creature and instantly understood why the smell was so bad. It had been some time since he last saw a cleaver. Skeleton referred to him and asked who was his master. Cleaver made a fast stroke, and Patrick commented that it was definitely an attack worthy of his frame. But still, there was no way that such a slow attack would ever land. Only with a single blow, Skeleton destroy his opponent. Suddenly, the silence was interrupted by a quiet whistle. Patrick's helmet was knocked off, and he commented that it was really dirty. A Dullahan appeared in front of him. He wondered what he was preparing for. Patrick asked his opponent who ordered him to guard that place. But the creature, instead of answering, attacked him. Dullahan was using a sword of evil. Patrick knew that creature corrodes any weapon it clashes with, which makes battling against it tough. Skeleton asked him if they could settle that by talking things out between them, fellow undead. But the opponent kept attacking him. Patrick knew that it was a shame for an elder-level undead with intelligence to refuse to talk. Still, the Guardian needed to know why Dullahan was there. Patrick started to use different types of magic to get closer to his opponent. As Dullahan seemed not much for conversation, Skeleton decided to cut the chase. He borrowed the Sword of the Ghost. The heavy sword was a great divider. Suddenly, Lady Lara woke up because she'd got really cold. There was a Sir Knight near her bed who asked if she slept well. She screamed at how dare he was to step foot there in the middle of the night without a word. The poor woman was scared to death. Patrick explained that he came there for a reason and asked again if her name was Lara. He gave Lord Lara 5 minutes to explain herself and to summon that man who was with her at their first meeting. The skeleton was terribly sorry for calling them both at such a late hour, but he had stumbled upon something really strange during his last walk. Patrick threw a trophy on the table. Lady Lara was scared and disgusted. She didn't even know what was that. Skeleton got more serious and explained that it was the helmet of a Dullahan. He also asked why she was colluding with the undead. But the woman could understand why he was talking about those undead, and it seemed to Patrick that she would feign her ignorance till the end. He asked if she didn't even know what deal she had made. Lord Lara was too incompetent in what was going on in her own land. Her servant said that the knight wasn't worthy of her time and it would be better to arrest him. Patrick loudly reminded her that he personally killed the Dullahan in the underground dungeon under her residence. Young lady still couldn't understand what he was saying. Skeleton decided to act quickly and accused her servant of being undead as well. The woman screamed that she couldn't trust such ridiculous nonsense after he barged in there. And that man promised to save Harston. She couldn't understand how it was possible. By framing him, he was the one who threatened the peace of Harston. Lord Lara was both furious and thrilled. Patrick asked how could she say that while knowing where the through threat lies. The servant asked both of them to calm down. He wondered about the Dullahan, who wasn't even common among the undead. The Guardian happily explained that he was surprised himself that such a high-ranking undead was in a place like that. It made no sense in addition to how strange was that creature. They were an elder undead, meaning they should have possessed an ego, yet they were strangely quiet. Still, the fighting style was also very unnatural. That's why after destroying his soul, Patrick had done some research. The mind control magic circle was carved into the armor, and the Dullahan's name was Masham. That creature was once a vice leader of the Masham and Harda brothers subjugation team that was formed 30 years ago to subdue vicious undead that was attacking human villages. He was a very skilled knight. However, after the warrior was deployed, they lost all communication with him. Patrick asked Lara and her servant to guess who the vicious undead they were trying to subdue was. Then Skeleton decided to ask the servant differently. He would also appreciate it if the dear undead informant would answer him by himself. Where was the vicious undead Erebos? Lara couldn't even understand who he was talking about or why he was invoking the name of a boss monster from 7 malevolent dungeons. Her servant started laughing. Lord screamed at that man that he promised to save her territory. The woman was scared of the truth she discovered. He admitted that, of course, he promised with a bad smile on his face. Servant added that the plans had changed, and the time for peace in Harston ended there. The man wanted to make a dangerous move, but successfully Patrick prevented it and advised both of them to stay still. Lord Lara was shocked to face an undead so close to her. Suddenly his hand grew back. Umil promised to kill every last one of the humans in her territory and turn them into undead. All of them should be honored, receiving the blessing of true salvation when they had done nothing to earn it. Everything was the will of the king of the dead, Lord Erebos. Patrick admitted that he didn't suspect a thing at first. It was unbelievable that their invasion plan was so meticulous and organized. Umil confessed that he had an eye on Night from the start, and he exceeded his expectations in defeating Masham. Undead was curious to know more about him because he was the same, but still didn't serve Lord Erebos. Lara wondered if the knight was undead like him. Patrick knew that they still needed a lord that would manage the territory and collaborate with them, and he also didn't plan on killing her. Suddenly, he was in a bad mood. Patrick cut off the second hand of the Umil and urged him to listen carefully. If he had really done his research, he would definitely know about his companion and about his strengths also. That he was strong enough to ruin all of their plans. Undead said that it was interesting, but still, he would harm the humans as well. Skeleton also informed him that they were not on the human side, so he should stop pointlessly dodging the issue and tell everything. And of course, the Umel shouldn't forget to tell him about what ulterior motives his boss, Erebos, has up his sleeve. The undead agreed and asked if he knew how elders were born. Knight begged him to stop asking the questions and skip to the explanation. He didn't want to waste time on something like that. It turned out that for an ordinary human to become an elder, something huge and supernatural had to happen. They'd also need to carry a grudge strong enough to push them past death. Those creatures were called elders because a single one of them was stronger than thousands of zombies. Plus, Lord Erebod had the power to create elders using only magic. Patrick understood that there was a certain reason they had quarantined Harston and created false religion. Umil explained that for elder creation, living body with a weak soul is needed. That's why Harston was a perfect breeding ground. Undead orchestrated a great famine by isolating the land to crush the human spirit, and the religion they've created crushed humans even further. A weird creature was telling that they were going to destroy the Empire. Patrick could clearly understand why it was a bad idea. If the Empire fell and all those people became undead, the Erebos would certainly obtain great power, meaning that his next objective would be the malevolent dungeons. Undead started to tell that the awareness was always down too late. He was trying to cast high-ranking magic. Umil said that it was foolish of him to think that he would be unable to use magic if both of his arms were cut off. Patrick admitted that it was impressive of him. It was too naive of a skeleton to hope for truth because no one in the world could thwart Lord Erebos' master plan. It was said that the only one capable, the ancient monster, had secluded themselves for years after relocating. But even now, no one could stand in their way. Patrick was trying to get rid of those tentacles and saying that he wanted to ask the undead about something. Umil was shocked that his opponent was shaking off the restraints with brute strength. The skeleton reassured them, saying that no matter how grand their plans might be, if that ancient monster were to show up here, both he and Erebos would be screwed. Umil wondered what nonsense he was talking about. Suddenly, the ceiling got ruined and fell on the ground. It was Lord Swallow whose timing was impeccable. But it turned out the ancient monster hadn't come alone. He'd brought Mel's with him. The Demon King admitted that the buildings there were way too flimsy. Swallow wondered that Patrick now knew everything about what was really going on in Harston. Suddenly, a blood arrow targeted him and Boss Monster asked how dare he was to do that. Swallow pierced him with magic. Umil wondered about his strength and couldn't believe that it was... Patrick reminded that his companion was a lot stronger than he thought. Swallow was asking who he even was. The undead couldn't make sense of anything. They couldn't communicate, so how the heck was that ancient monster even there? What was more, Umil couldn't feel the energy of the crystal on the top floor. Plus, based on the strength of the girl's mana, she was definitely a Demon King. The undead needed to let Lord Erebos know about this shift in their plans, like ASAP. But to pull that off, they'd have to buy as much time as they could. Umil was wondering why the ancient monster showed up in that place. The undead was pretty sure he'd heard that the protagonist's whereabouts were a mystery ever since they invaded Laiz. The blow happened unexpectedly. The undead were lying on the ground, trying to yell through gritted teeth that they were already way too late. Mel's easily ignited their opponent and noticed that he was talking too much. Swallow was supposed to get a load of that guy. Umil was shouting about the bow and worship, declaring that their king had descended onto that land. That creature was making a big show of all that. Outside the castle, people started to notice something seriously strange going on. The sky was getting all sorts of dark. Rosalina was hurrying up home. She looked surprised, and even a bit scared. Out of nowhere, she ran into Toth, who wasn't asleep. The guy said he should be the one asking that and wondered where she'd come from. The redhead explained she was just feeling off. So she stepped out to get some fresh air and ended up walking around Zabeth. Suddenly it hit her. She just told him she'd gone to a place where no one ever goes because it's so polluted. Rosalina was freaked out by the thought of his anger, but Toth just laughed and said she was out of her mind. The man told her about the boss's new decision to leave Harston tomorrow night. He wasn't sure how she felt about them, but their boss didn't really trust those knights. He told the redhead to follow him while he filled her in on the way. They reached a place where Rosalina's parents had been buried, all the way at the bottom of that pit. Once they leave Harston, they wouldn't be able to come back there, and the decision was up to her only. Rosalina admitted she really didn't get why the boss wanted to leave Harston. That city was definitely going to be saved. They just needed to hang on a little longer. Toth explained that while she'd be waiting for a salvation that might never come, her parents would be stuck in that dark place for sure. He added that the God she believed wasn't the only one who could grant salvation. Her actions could bring salvation as well. The redhead thought carefully about his words. She decided to give it a chance. But someone grabbed her hand and wondered who would come here in the middle of the night. The bishop asked what Rosalina was doing in that place. She couldn't understand what His Excellency was trying to pull. He reached out and made an effort to grab her hand, the fire in it burning bright. Toth didn't really care if that man was a bishop, but he asked him to let the girl go. But at one moment he felt such a strange similarity of smell. Rosalina screamed, demanding that His Excellency put out the fire on his arm. The man shacked her off. Toth named him bastard, but something odd was going on. The bishop was completely engulfed in flames, like a phoenix going through its rebirth. Finally, the strange man stood up in front of the two of them. The way he looked was enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Toth couldn't believe there was an actual undead standing there. Rosalina hoped it was just some mistake with His Excellency. The bishop ordered the humans to shut up, saying silence was the only song worthy of His Majesty. At a moment, all of the corpses began transforming into something abnormal. Toth told Rosalina to run as fast as they could. Thousands of those dangerous creatures were now following them. Luckily, they made it to a house and blocked the door with all the stuff they had gathered. The makeshift barricade should be enough to buy them sometime. Rosalina complained that she couldn't move anymore. Her legs were both tired and bruised. He took her on himself and decided to escape to the second floor, which would be a bit safer. Toth was wondering to himself if both of them would make it out alive. And if they didn't, what the heck were they supposed to do then? When they entered the next room, they found some more corpses as well. Rosalina hoped they were safe now. Toth explained that it was just as dangerous there, so they had to make it out alive. He told her it was better for her to pull it together. He approached the dead man and started doing something weird. The redhead was scared out of her mind. He came up to her with a knife. Toth cut off her talisman and said that this thing had made her uncomfortable every time he saw it. If she was going to put her faith in something, then from now on, it had better be in something actually worth believing in. They could feel the door must have been busted open. What were they supposed to do now? Rosalina couldn't understand where he was going, but he decided to act. The man closed the door and left her all alone. He did everything to keep her safe. Toth asked her not to make any noise. It was way better than getting greedy and having both of them end up dead. Rosalina was crying in front of the door. She wanted her friend to come back to her. The undead summoned his heavenly army, made up of creatures born from human corpses. The full scare attack began. People realized the eerie red sky was all because the new lord had taken over. They wondered why Lady Lara hadn't shown her face in weeks, not even once. An injured man pushed his way to the crowd, shouting that it was dangerous here. The magician from the tower could give him some help. Injured said that the undead were coming. He tried to warn everyone about it. The whole army of undead was about to face them. Suddenly, the Knight of Lord's castle ran up to them to help. They said that the undead were monsters, but they weren't as strong as they might thought. The knight asked them to choose whether would they run or fight there together. A few wizards from the magic tower wings wanted to help everyone. Those strong enough to wield weapons should come to the front, while the rest should try to set up a defensive line. They were going to defend Harston to the very end. The captain couldn't make sense of what was happening outside. He was worried about where Toth and Rosalina had run off to at a time like this. Luckily, he found the redhead. He asked what had happened to her. The girl said that the Toth told her to stay still. Rosalina explained that he told her not to leave, but she still came all the way there because she was too scared. And Toth, because of her. She broke down, crying so hard she could barely get the words out. The captain asked if Toth died. Would he even blame her? He wouldn't do that. That's why she shouldn't put it like that. It was only thanks to Toth. He was the reason she was still alive. Rosalina explained that the undead back there wasn't normal and they needed help. The captain just couldn't wrap his head around what she was talking about. They definitely needed the knight's help. The Capitan gave her a potion that would heal her and give her some strength. He affirmed that he couldn't leave his comrades behind while they fought. The Capitan promised Toth that she would keep her safe. He wouldn't let his sacrifice go to waste. He asked Rosalina to get the knights. Patrick mentioned that there was a whole mess going on down there and that the boss should check it out. Mel's agreed, saying they were definitely struggling. Swallow was lying down again and mentioned that it was none of their business. But Patrick explained that they should take care of everything. The Guardian noticed the humans were holding their own pretty well, and the boss wondered how much longer they'd last. Patrick said they had enough weapons, and even though they gathered everyone in a rush, their defensive line was holding up pretty well. However, if things kept going like this, they'd tire out in no time and get overwhelmed by the thousands of undead. And according to what Umel said, there'd be elders mixed in with the undead. Either way, Erebos had definitely planned that out carefully. Patrick thought they'd have to repay the favor. Swallow agreed and mentioned that before they did that, he had something he needed to take care of. The boss monster approached the Lord of Harston and asked her name. Swallow lifted her face and asked if she even wanted to live. Patrick wondered what he was talking about if they should only kill that lady. Swallow explained that he'd go through with it but suddenly changed his mind. His guardian was curious about what the boss would do next, while Harston was already beyond rescue. The protagonist asked him to think it over. They'd given up on the city halfway through because of the undead. But what if all the undead there just disappeared and the Lord did whatever they pleased? Then they wouldn't have to abandon the city. It was a pretty desperate plan, but one worth considering. Patrick thought that trying to rehabilitate the city without killing the Lord might actually be worth their while. Mel's agreed that Patrick was right. There was no way humans who knew the truth would keep their promises. Swallow replied that he didn't think that was necessarily the case. It looked like that human there had a reason she needed to live. The fact that Lady Lara was afraid of him yet couldn't look away proved it. The woman was fine even after seeing his appearance. He thought she might be useful. Patrick agreed she was probably just an ordinary human too. Swallow wondered if maybe that human had a special constitution. Of all the humans he'd met so far, those called heroes also had special constitutions. They had a kind of talent that couldn't be gained through effort alone. The Lord had the mental strength not to go insane, even after seeing him. Swallow remarked that someone like that wouldn't do anything that could risk their own life for sure. Patrick wondered if that was his only reason for trusting her. The protagonist added that it was also his intuition. Patrick snapped, saying he should kindly leave intuition out of it and stick to logic only. The Death Knight knew it wasn't much to go off, but still, he asked if it was the boss's wish and what the tasks would be. He added that if everything went to crap, he'd handle the whole cleanup. Swallow took a moment to think it over. The protagonist approached Lara and gave her options to choose from. He said that if she asked nicely to be saved, everything would be sorted. The woman asked what would happen after that. Everything was simple. The undead would back off and Harston would return to peace. Patrick would help her both physically and mentally through it all. The Guardian freaked out at the boss, wondering who he was selling out. Lara wondered what she should do in return. Swallow took a guess and said something simple would be the best. The boss answered that she should give them everything. Lara knew that if she refused, she was definitely going to die, either at the hands of those monsters or the undead. On the other hand, if she agreed, she'd survive but lose everything. She started thinking about the past. If only the Black Calamity hadn't happened, would her brother still be alive? If he hadn't died, would someone like her have ever become the Lord of Harston? Patrick was ready to finish everything and started searching for his sword. Suddenly, Rosalina burst into their room, immediately screaming for help from the knights. She said that the undead invaded the village and everyone was fighting together, but it was still not enough. The redhead explained that Toth had died and the captain was waiting for her. Everyone was holding on desperately, so she begged them for help. She wondered what the knight really looked like. Swallow explained that the decision had been handed over to a different human. Lord Lara wondered if the people were really dying. Patrick said it was about time for them to start wiping them out, and asked Mel's to show them the real situation outside. The Demon King created a special creature and sent it out to observe everything. The situation was devastating. There were all sorts of dangerous creatures. Patrick commented that it would be tough for the humans to make it out as survivors. Rosalina couldn't believe her eyes. She was crying, begging for the killing to stop. She asked why they were doing nothing when they had so much power and strength. The redhead prayed for them to save everyone. The girl came up to Lord Lara and screamed into her face what she was doing while people were dying. Rosalina was desperate and furious. Lara gave up and begged Swallow to save everyone who was left in Harston. Swallow commented that it wasn't anything too difficult, so they would. The trio set off for their messiah. The man was trying to face all of those monsters who weren't weak at all. And also quantitative superiority was on the side of the undead. Out of nowhere, Mel's dropped down to help. She was annoyed because she'd meant to land on the roof. The Demon King started to cast all of her different spells on enemies. Suddenly, a bishop approached her and wondered what a demon was doing there. With her human form and such a massive amount of mana, he figured she had to be either a demon king or a dragon. He couldn't understand why she was siding with the humans. Mel's replied that she was doing whatever she felt like, and an undead like him had no business questioning a king. He laughed at her, saying he'd find out the truth after tearing off her flesh. To an elder like him, she was just a fool who overestimated her strength. The bishop suggested she throw away her humanity and become an undead. That way, she'd definitely transform into a stronger variant. Mel's wondered if it was the first most talkative undead she had ever met. The creature explained that he was the one serving as the commander of the undead. Magnus summoned his magical weapon and wondered how he could possibly lose to a demon king like her. Mel's couldn't understand what he was going on about and added that she wouldn't be the one facing him. Everything happened really fast. The ancient monster appeared right near him and said that he finally found that bastard. Swallow reminded his promise to remember him. He landed a brutal punch on Magnus. The hit was powerful enough to damage a building, and Swallow actually enjoyed that nice feeling. If his guess was right, Magnus was the gatekeeper of the undead army, a role that also made him the gatekeeper of the 7 great dungeons. Swallow ordered him to get up quickly. Mel's realized that taking down someone like that with just a punch meant the boss was holding back. He also advised the Demon King not to stay there too long, because nothing good would come of it. He wondered if Erebos was in the village. The girl replied to the protagonist that it was unlikely. The barrier trapping them inside had closed off any view of the surroundings. She considered that the undead were outside the town, but still, she wouldn't be able to break through the barrier. Swallow added that he was going to handle it himself. He also asked the girl if she'd be fine taking care of all those creatures, and he wanted her to minimize the loss of human lives. Mel's couldn't promise it to be perfect, but still, it was a perfect task for her. As expected of the Demon King, the girl was awesome. Swallow explained that he would clean up the area first before heading to have a one-on-one with Erebos. It would take him a maximum of 20 minutes. Mel's wished him a safe trip and then went on to carry out her tasks. Swallow finally approached Magnus, who guessed that he was an ancient monster. The undead warned that he had prepared for facing him. Magnus started yelling that he was one of the pillars of Lord Erebos' forces and had never been disappointed by him until now. The undead started to run away so he could take a chance to get to the Lord Erebos. But Swallow chased him, saying that he kept annoying him. Magnus couldn't believe that it was really the Swallow of the malevolent dungeon. He understood that the situation was getting far too dangerous and he should hurry up to Erebos. He was trying to run away as quickly as possible, but still, he was inside of the monster's jaw. But when Swazlow closed in, it was too late. That bastard was really fast and went away through the dome. His attempt to eat an enemy in one bite failed, but he didn't want to spend any more time just going for him. Swallow was really worried about Mel's, that's why he decided to act fast. That bastard Magnus probably ran off to his mother, who was outside of the village. If he wanted to leave, he would probably have to stick close to the castle walls, but it was just his guesses. But that powerful spell indeed hit him. Swallow was guided by the idea that if he blew everything up in that general direction, that bug would get caught up in it as well. The damage was quite powerful and Monster could practically hear Patrick's voice. Luckily, he found the corpses of that bug. He muttered that it was only Magnus's fault that the village was in such a mess. He brought the body with him and came up to the huge dome that surrounded Harston. The barrier was strong enough that it couldn't be broken with Meltz's strength or anything like that. He decided to test how impressive it really was, and it was indeed decent. Swallow reckoned that he could probably get through it, but only if that Demura bracelet held up. If it got destroyed and Patrick's polymorph couldn't be maintained, he'd definitely get an earful after the fight. Swallow turned into the real monster and tried his luck to get through that barrier. The result was quite impressive, and he finally appeared outside. The protagonist was surrounded by dozens of monsters, all trying to get their filthy hands on him. The way they treated their guests was appalling. Swallow got to the elders and stated that he should have done that from the beginning. He threw his present on the ground. He said it looked like they had a lot to discuss with Erebos. That king of undead was surrounded by his slaves and ominous energy. He asked if Swallow believed it was right for those countless species to be persecuted by humans. Those creatures were too vulgar, arrogant, and selfish. Even after securing enough to sustain themselves, they kept invading other species' lands. Swallow kindly asked him to get to the main point. Erebos wanted all humans erased, and Swallow's strength was more than enough to destroy the entire empire. The undead king thought that they would never be able to take over the empire, not unless Lies fell, and then he heard about Black Calamity that happened there. A single word from his calling for the destruction of humanity and all the monsters would have laid down their lives for that cause. Swallow was tired of listening to his fairy tales. Erebos said if only Swallow hadn't been so idle, then all those monsters would never have had to die. They could have even exterminated those vulgar humans. Swallow wondered if he was trying to convince him that he was the problem. Erebos confirmed that it all happened because of him only. Ancient Monster said that he was dismissed. Now Swallow wanted to understand everything clearly. The undead king wanted to exterminate all of humanity, so it was best for him to not interfere. Erebos said that it was really a pity for him and started to cast different spells. The giant creature, rotting Tapirus, descended from the magical sky, ready to face Lord Swallow, who had just removed his bracelet and prepared for the real fight. At the same time, Mel's was facing a whole crowd of enemies inside Harston. Demon King successfully burned out all of them and said that she had no choice but to cover more ground with fire. Suddenly, the Capitan approached her and asked if the rest were safe. The girl explained that the other humans were burning over there. The man wondered if she was the companion of the knights. The Capitan explained that he was talking about the man wearing a massive suit of armor and the one wearing black clothes like a wanderer. Mel's answered that he was right. The man seemed happy because he knew that the Rosalina did everything on time, and Toth's sacrifice wasn't in vain. He felt powerless on the ground and murmured that the Harston could be saved. The Capitan begged the mage to listen to his last request. He asked her to pass the weapon which was nearby. Mel's replied that he was a warrior and should end his path proudly. After that, the Demon King could sense a huge amount of ominous energy. Lord Swallow was fighting against another powerful monster. The undead king was slightly shocked. Indeed, the strength of that creature was befitting of the ancient monster. Suddenly, Erebos started to cast the god-class magic, Fang of Malice. It was the highest class of magic, even among the most powerful spells. Swallow might be an ancient monster, but there was no way he could withstand that. Erebos wanted him to be in awe. After such an impact, Swallow wasn't at his best position. The undead king was yelling about finally killing that ancient monster and filling all that land with the undead. Erebos desired to become a transcendent being, one who truly ruled over the dead. He hoped the protagonist would feel blessed to finally die after thousands of years of wandering. But suddenly something shifted. Swallow moved closer to Erebos and said that it hurt. Hurt so much that he didn't think he could keep letting him land another hit. Undead couldn't believe what he had just heard. Swallow wondered if that was really the strongest magic Erebos could use. It seemed like he was treating the whole thing as a joke. Erebos couldn't believe he was being treated like a fool. Had Swallow really let him land that hit just to test the power of god-class magic? He didn't have another chance now, all because of his haste. Erebos desperately wanted to retreat. Lord Swallow spoke to Erebos, warning him not to get any strange ideas, and advising him to use something stronger if he had it. He wondered why his enemies had gone so quiet. Swallow remarked that he could take it as a sign they didn't have anything stronger for him. Moments later, he was struck by another powerful spell, and murmured that they were all acting the same, like they were following one single script. Erebos chuckled Swallow into the magical chain that should have stopped him. Lord hated such kind of spell, and was delighted to see one of those god-class creatures again, who tried to kill him. But Swallow decided to take it more seriously. Firstly, he decided to fight that sturdy creature, but then he just swallowed it, confirming his legendary name. And now it was about time to replace one of the 7 great evil dungeons. At the same time, Patrick was going crazy about the whole situation. He was too worried about the boss and angry at him at the same time. He was really hoping his boss remembered why people called him a disaster and could chill out a bit, so he didn't make things worse. Lord Lara and Rosalina wondered what was going on outside. Patrick explained that the boss was making a mess. Suddenly, Mel's appeared in front of them and said that the whole battle was too tiring. She explained that she had finished everything, and it had been a while since she had to use so much mana. The Death Kite was happy that the Lady Demon King was here to help them. Mel's wondered if Sir Devourer was still doing most of the work. Patrick explained that the boss, as far as she could tell, was caught up in the middle of a fight. That power was something to see. It was even crazier when they thought about the aftermath. Plus, he always ends up making more work for everyone whenever he goes out to fix things. Patrick came up to Rosalina and reminded her that the Territory Lord was the only one they promised to keep alive. He should clean up things up there first. There was no point in keeping anyone alive other than the Lord. Lara wanted to stop him because she was also one of her subjects. Patrick laughed and explained that it was just a joke. Of course, there was no real reason for it. It's not like she could handle everything on her own, especially when those back-alley thugs were all gone. More importantly, with Rosalina's mind in such a state, there was no point in doing anything to her. If killing the redhead affects the Lord, it would be a loose for them. Patrick asked Mel's to put someone asleep. Demon King wondered what was the problem. The Death Knight wanted to speak with Lord Lara alone. After that, Rosalina instantly fallen asleep. Patrick told the woman that she could see them doing their part in saving Harston, so she should stick to her promise. Lara wondered what exactly needed to be done. The Guardian told her not to leak anything she'd seen so far, and promised to tell her a story she'd never forget. It is a tale about a heroic territory lord who took on all the insults to protect her home. The lord who realized that the undead were going to overrun her territory, made up her mind to protect its citizens, but she was in a situation where she was being watched by the enemy. There were also not enough soldiers in the town, and the only option left was to ask for help. However, even before the help could arrive, the people in the territory started insulting her in rage, faulting the lord. As the people were dying to the undead while waiting for the reinforcements, the Lord had no choice but to hold steadfast. After what seemed like a century, the reinforcements from the Empire came and drove the undead away. And saved Harsting. That was an amazing story for her. She wasn't a scaredy cat of a lord who was in hiding. She was a great lord who sacrificed herself to save the subjects of her territory. Patrick told her to go distribute all the supplies in the castle to help the people still alive. He added that aid from other cities would be arriving soon. Lara wondered how he was so sure that the aid would come. Patrick explained that he would make it happen himself, since they would be taking care of making the young Lord of Harston a hero. At the same time, Swallow understood that it was about time to replace one of the 7 great dungeons, and also he felt sorry for him. Erebos would have avoided all this if he had just kept quiet somewhere. Swallow had been stabbed so much that his back was itching now. The undead king was once again stunned by his own strength. Swallow admitted that he didn't really care about any of that. The ancient monster wondered why it had to be Harston. If only he hadn't attacked that place, Swallow wouldn't have had to make his way there. Erebos explained that the Harston was the most effective location to invade the Empire from, but the protagonist wasn't talking about that. That meant that bastard came there knowing it was his territory. Erebos yelled, bursting with magic, demanding to know what he thought the reason was. Swallow pierced that creature with his magic. But Erebos's laughter was downright insane. Suddenly he exploded, and only his head fell to the ground. Swallow wondered what that was about. Erebos wasn't even trying to use transfer magic. But it didn't really matter to him at that moment. That king was going to die anyway. Suddenly he heard a very familiar noise from somewhere not far away. Patrick ordered him to stop right there and not move. He'd come and find him himself. The Guardian really missed his boss. The protagonist realized he was screwed. When it was all over, Rosalina was left alone in Harston. She tried to hold on to all the precious moments she'd shared with her friends. There was nothing left, and she hated it with every part of her being. She wondered what kind of help that was if she was the only one left standing. She asked herself whose fault it was and who was the one that killed everyone. At the same time, Lord Swallow and his colleagues returned to the core of the Ancient. Renee greeted Mr. Devourer with a cheerful welcome. But those 3 were too tired to be as cheerful as Blade Maid. Swallow gave her a quick pat on the head and praised Renee for her hard work in keeping the dungeon safe and sound. On the other hand, monsters felt like dying. Renee couldn't understand what was going on with them. Maid wondered what her boss would prefer to take first. The options were a bath and dinner. Swallow answered that he would drink the bathwater. Renee's unusually sweet behavior seemed suspicious to Patrick, and he wondered what Bathory had been teaching her while they were away. But Elizabeth was interested in the result of their work. Patrick explained that the death toll was around 3,000 humans, and he reminded her not to forget how that damn boss had blown up the entire town. Bathory was disappointed and wondered what Devourer had been doing over there. Swallow explained that he'd just cleaned up the undead, but Lady Boss wanted him to retell about what exactly he cleaned up perfectly. Swallow put the head on the table and asked not to bother him, because it was sleep time. Bathory examined the head carefully and was shocked about what she had noticed. Swallow wondered what was wrong again. Miss Bathory yelled that it was just the shell of that damned king of the undead. No one could believe their ears. Later, Swallow confirmed that Erebos had indeed used magic at the end. Patrick added that, no matter how he looked at it, it was just sloppy work from his boss. Leaving the Lord who knew everything alive was already questionable, but now even Erebos was alive. Swallow repeated Bathory's words about the undead king losing at least 70% of his life, but even still Patrick was disappointed. On top of everything, there was still conflict between the great evil dungeons, and his boss needed to be more careful about things now. Swallow hoped that they were fine for now, while Erebos wouldn't be able to make a move for a while. Skeleton wanted the protagonist to remember that he should be the one accepting new monsters into his dungeon, while Patrick would be taking care of Harston Aftermath. But the boss was already sleeping. Rosalina's path was not over. She went to some strange place to find there. Some alive humans were arguing about their screwed lives, which soon would become pointless. The redhead came up to them and said that she was also suffering and wanted to run away. But why they have to be the ones who go somewhere else? She yelled and asked who had killed everyone. Everything was unfair. She didn't want them directing their hate at the wrong target. If they were going to die anyway, they should at least take revenge. They had to kill all the undead. The Emperor asked Edelbrecht's guard to come over for a meeting. His Majesty mentioned that the lives of the raid force were on her shoulders. The Emperor had high expectations for her, and the woman promised she would make sure to live up to them. After that, she had a conversation with the hero Garrett, who asked if she had received full authority to lead the dungeon raid. But Gar was more serious than happy about it. She was only worried about black disaster that happened a month ago and descended upon Riazé. It caused a lot of unrest in the upper echelons of the Empire, with blame being thrown around. Those who couldn't handle it properly ended up being devoured. Too many things had changed. Garrett wondered if her friend knew about the upcoming meeting and asked what she should do personally in case she was late. but the Gar insisted on them just waiting for her and asked if Historia was inside of the castle. The hero was truly there and way too happy to see her friends and comrades. A group of people entered the great dungeon, making sure not to let their guard down. Before long, they would be reaching the first room. Those warriors hoped that the information received by them was accurate, especially the fact that the monster hadn't reappeared since the Hishulat raid force came 2 months ago was true. But there was nothing in 3 rooms in a row. The men began to wonder if the data was accurate. If they hadn't seen anything after going this deep, there really might be nothing there. One of the men said that in the 5th room lay the ancient plant monster called the Anthropophago. It was a plant-type monster with thorny leaves and vines. They also wondered what they should do if the next room turned out to be empty as well. But when a subjugation party came in, they spotted the plant and started gathering its parts. The monster suddenly approached them. Patrick said it was expected that those guys didn't have anything worth money. Renee admitted they might have returned alive if it hadn't been for their greed. The Blade Maid really hated humans. Patrick wondered what the boss thought about these intruders. The protagonist confessed that the taste was much better than the undead. Swallow admitted it was the answer he expected. He also pointed out that the team wasn't from the Empire. Based on their coats, they were from the West Crantal Kingdom. The Guardian felt like they could no longer relay reinforcing the Dujion. The rumors of the dungeon being void of monsters were spreading too fast. Patrick wondered how Swallow could be so unreliable when they were talking about his own dungeon. Even he started to feel nothing about that. The skeleton wanted his boss to come down for a chat. He murmured that if it didn't happen, he'd have to bring out his letter of resignation. Swallow immediately approached him, but Patrick, with a sigh of relief, mentioned that thankfully they had Lady Melia as a guest during such hard times. They were able to find out about the intruders quickly, thanks to her detection magic. Mel's was delighted, but she wondered how long did she have to stay there as a guest. The Weir monster told his master that the preparations were already done. They should start heading towards Judecca. It was said to the Demon King, His Majesty Ubar. Mel's was sitting outside, lost in thought about her future, which felt pretty bleak to her. It was tough, especially since she had no money or a place to call home, even though she was supposed to be the Demon King. She should make a decision soon since there would be a gathering for the Demon Kings in a couple of days. Patrick came up to her and said that the air felt more refreshing that day. He wondered what she was doing there all alone. The Demon King said she was really taking some time to think things over, and then asked about Patrick, wondering what he was up to. The Guardian explained that he didn't have any need for sleep, so he spent whatever time he left on training. Patrick also mentioned that there wasn't anything serious, but it seemed like Mr. Tentacles had pretty much finished recovering. Even Lady Renee was waiting around. Mel said the monster didn't seem fully healed yet, but honestly, that was about as good as it was going to get. Renee mentioned that there were now 68 tentacles, and though there were still a few more to go, the recovery rate was pretty slow. She didn't expect it to regrow more than 5 at a time. The Demon King wondered if that monster really fought against the Hishutalt trade union. Patrick explained that Lady Melia had a Demon King castle near Laiz, so it would be pretty strange if she didn't know about it. The girl mentioned that it was the raid force that the greatest hero, Burn Hishutalt, was part of. She also pointed out that it was the same raid force that had killed her father. Mel's couldn't wrap her head around how powerful Mr. Tentacles must be to have survived a fight against such tough enemies. If it had been her, just like her father. Mel's realized that her wish to stay in the primordial core was nothing more than a dream. Patrick referred to Renee and said that after Mr. Tentacles recovering, they should convince the boss to think about monsters recruitment. Suddenly, Mel's called for both Guardian and Maid and announced that it was the best for her to leave for Judecca. Wooen and Garrett were getting ready for the evening's meeting in the Emperor's castle. Gar asked if the maid was around today, but the girl wasn't sure, since she'd been spending a lot of time shopping. The main lady asked the heroes to head to the meeting room first, saying she still had some papers to take care of. Wooen asked her to hurry up and meet them at the gathering. Gar wondered who were the maids who cleaned the tea set. Her personal assassin promised to track them down as soon as possible. The woman added that he didn't need to report on the progress. Cleaning the tea set without her knowing meant they had gone through some of the confidential files. Gar ordered him to find those maids and get rid of them. Soon enough, everyone gathered at the meeting. They were called there to discuss the Black Disaster, Devourer, what were threatening the peace of the Empire. Squad leader Carta said the royal courts had announced that the Black Disaster wasn't the Devourer. He then asked the others around him if they wanted to deny what the courts had stated. Gar answered that it was just a way to calm the citizens down. He wanted to see proof that the Devourer was actually the Black Disaster. She explained that had seen it with her own eyes. That creature fought directly with Wooen, leading to Garrot losing an arm. People started to blame her for lies, but the evidence was in front of them. Leader Carta believed her and let Miss Gar finish her speech. The woman explained that the Devourer had shown up out of nowhere, with no warning or signs. They were here to prepare, because they had no idea when that monster would show up again. Others wondered what was the plan and how she was supposed to stop him. It didn't seem like there was anything wrong with Laze's defense, explained Duke Rolthos. So it meant that all those defenses were pretty much useless when facing the Devourer. Gar agreed with him and added that she wanted to remind all of them of the need for the 36th masterpiece. Of course, everyone was already looking for them, but those items weren't that easy to find. Even the tooth, which had just been released, ended up in the monster's hands. The question was, how many of them would be able to put up a fight against that creature? Even with the greatest talents of the Empire gathered here, it was all useless. To overcome that overwhelming presence and the massive gap in power, the 36th masterpiece was a must. Gar added that the Pope's movements had been strange lately. He'd spread rumors that the Devourer was God's punishment toward the Empire. One of the participants exploded, yelling about the nonsense they were talking about. Wuan explained that it wasn't a surprise, since the Empire had been suppressing religion for generations. The woman warned her to watch her mouth, saying those words could easily be mistaken for treason. She grabbed Gar by the collar and screamed that it was no joke. The assassin stopped her with a blade and murmured that she was overestimating her own power. Gar answered that she was not taking that issue lightly. If they've left that issue alone, the Empire would split into two due to the plans of the Pope faction. Of the 36 masterpieces, the Pope's faction was holding 3 of them, calling them holy relics. Gar knew they would need to start a great holy war to take those items from them. When Patrick came up to the Swallow with the news, his reaction was too miserable. Skeleton blew up with anger, repeating that Lady Mel's had left them. Patrick was trying to explain that she was leaving just because she could get through to him. Swallow covered his ears and explained that the girl was headed to Judaica, and that wasn't an issue. The Demon Kings were having a ball, so it was normal for them to go there. The skeleton took up his paw and screamed that the problem was that Mel's might not come back. But Monster answered that she didn't say about that exactly. Patrick decided to think about it more and explained that Lady Mel's was acting strange even before she brought up going to Judaica. Instead of saying she'd be back, the Demon King mentioned she might have to leave. Maybe the skeleton was reading too much into it. Soon Renee joined them, and Swallow remarked that he understood Mel's had left. But was that the only reason they'd gathered like this? Maybe they had something else to tell him. Patrick added that they couldn't keep putting off the issue of replenishing the monsters any longer. But the protagonist wasn't thrilled that he was trying to dump it all on him. His guardian added that he wasn't wrong, but it just wouldn't work. Maybe he'd already forgotten what he'd left with Patrick and Harston, which was why he still had so much to take care of. Swallow wondered why he was agreeing so easily, and his guardian added that, of course, Lady Renee would handle that task. Blade Maid was really crazy about her boss and answered that he should worry and leave everything to her. In that moment, Swallow realized something was wrong. The protagonist told his guardian that Renee was still having trouble with her eyes, and people might get suspicious of her. Patrick sympathized with him. His answer was epic. He considered Boss leaving it all to her and resting. Melds came to the mercenary city Kanahit. It was located between the countries of the Empire and the Kingdom Alliance. 1 in 4 people in that city had careers involving dungeon raids. It was also said to be the place with the most information about the dungeons. It was Mel's first time being in such an unfriendly place, and she could only rely on the stars to find her way to Judaica. That city was also filled with dense mana, especially around 10 individuals whose strength was similar to the mages she had seen in Laiz. Demon King suddenly felt something strange and decided to follow that feeling. She came up to the place where dozens of monsters were kept in the cages. The woman approached her and wondered what such a pretty little lady would be doing in a place like this, especially with a creature from the cage still staring at Mel's. The woman introduced herself as Pun, the owner of all those creatures. She asked Mel's if she was looking for something in particular. Pun knew that it couldn't be a normal child in front of her. Humans' kids would never come alone to such places. That's why she decided to treat her in a good way. Mel's wondered what kind of place this was, and the owner explained that it was a storage warehouse for dungeon items. Demon King wanted to take a look since she needed to recruit for her army when her castle would be rebuilt. As Mel's was leaving the ancient core, Lady Renee gave her a small gesture of thanks for helping Mr. Devourer. Now, her budget was 500. Mel's stopped near the cage with the lonely creature. The owner wasn't sure about it either, but it had been found while cleaning up after a raid. Those people hadn't been able to find its mother, but the creature didn't even try to attack. They just saw it as a bigger dog. Mel's brought her hand inside a cage and murmured that he was a lost child as well. The owner was shocked and warned her customer that it was too dangerous. The dog started licking her hand, and Mel's explained that she wouldn't place any blame on it, so there was no need to worry. Mel's ended up buying him and was wondering about his enormous sizes. She wasn't able to measure him properly since his dark fur was hidden in the dim lightning, and she spent on him only 20 ones. The girl knew about a starfall and decided to check it out with her new friend. She remembered that the sky in the primordial core was also, but it wasn't the best time to be emotional. Demon King needed to hurry up and get to Judaica. Soon enough, they've got to the right place and met a eeled creature staring at them. Mel's whispered a special phrase, saying that the Great One had returned and should lead the way. The Guardian welcomed the Demon King and told her to head to the fallen monastery behind the mountains. The other kings had already arrived. Mel's decided to leave her friend in the field to wait for her. She couldn't take him to a place where the escorts were scrutinized so strictly. Also, she decided to name him Sir Devda and promised to come back as soon as possible. That name was made in the memory of Lord Swallow, whom she wouldn't be able to see anymore. At the same time, in the core of the ancient, Patrick was setting a new task for his boss. He also had prepared a new bracelet to keep Swallow's mana stable. Renee was already ready for their trip. It felt like they were going on a honeymoon, and the maid was really looking forward to it. Patrick and Swallow were speechless when they saw Renee in such a good mood. He warned both of them not forget about the reason they were leaving, and asked to come back without causing any trouble. Patrick was once again alone in the dungeon, wondering if it had been a big mistake to send two of them on such an important task. Mel's was a bit worried because it had been a while since she had been at the meeting of the Demon King's Judica. She could clearly remember how she was the center of attention whenever she came there with her father. Now she was irrelevant and lonely. Suddenly, someone pushed her, and the girl spilled some wine on herself. Mel's wondered what the problem was and yelled, demanding to know how that person dared to bump into a Demon King. But everyone around was just laughing at her. Those bastards were looking down at poor Mel's. They did it knowing she was powerless to fight back at that moment. The girl murmured that they should just wait until she created a great army. Once again, someone's hand got on her shoulder and Mel's became furious, because those creatures weren't satisfied with just once. But the pretty woman wondered if she was Mel's. The Demon King recognized her old friend Marmola. She was relieved to see that Mel's was still alive and had come for the Judica. Marmola remarked that it felt like just yesterday they were playing and studying together as kids. Melia asked her to stop acting so rudely, and mentioned that she was still far from being a dignified Demon King. Marmola asked, since when they'd started acting that way with each other and proposed to go somewhere else first. At the same time, Swallow and Rene arrived at the mercenary city of Nahit. They went to the hotel and requested the best room. Mr. Devourer was happy to have some rest already and immediately fall on his bed. Renee said that he couldn't just lay there and rest, but she heard that there was a dungeon store nearby. They just needed to pick up some monsters from there, so if he helped out, they'd finish things quickly. Renee knew they should really get moving, but Boss still looked exhausted. That was their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. When Patrick came up to her and suggested Renee spend some quality time alone with the boss, the maid hoped it was going to be their honeymoon. Renee had done everything Patrick told her to, thinking that if Mr. Devourer came on his own, it would prove how important she was to him. The Blade Maid desperately wanted to make Lord Swallow hers, but only after taking care of everything they needed to do quickly. Renee thought that she was a genius. Marmelia told Mel's that she had sent some monsters to investigate the situation with her castle, but sadly, it was turned into the human territory. Her childhood friend added that everyone had been worried about her and asked where Mel's had been for the past 2 months. Melia knew that she shouldn't mention the core of the ancient and explained that she was wandering here and there. Marmelia took her hand and explained that no matter what had happened, the most important thing was her life. Mel's decided to confess her fears, thinking that Marmelia might hate her like the other Demon Kings, especially since their fathers hadn't been on the best terms. The woman explained that it was only between their fathers and that competition was already in the past. Both of them were Demon Kings who have gone down on their path now. Marmelia wondered why her friend had come to Judica. Was she there seeking help? Melia felt saddened to realize that Marmelia already knew everything, but the Demon King had promised to help her. Marmelia explained that she was saying that as a friend of hers was not a Demon King, and she could do it as long as she put in the effort. It was a shock for Mel's that her friend of childhood was now so mature unlike her. Melia thanked her for help and promised to rebuild her castle. Marmelia believed in her. Even when they were kids, they were always fighting. Mel's thought it might be because of their father's influence. As far as she could remember, the Demon Kings had always been on bad terms. However, in their childhood, there was a moment when both she and Marmelia began to change. As the woman led the way, Mel's remarked that she was still as childish as ever. Marmelia asked why Mel's was suddenly saying that, but Mel's brushed it off, saying it was nothing, and asked where they were headed. The Demon King explained that she couldn't help her rebuild her forces on her own, so she had enlisted the help of other kings with similar goals. Mel's was delighted by such kindness from her old friend. All their hopes were dashed the moment they stepped into the room, which was packed with Demon Kings who had already gathered in Judica. Marmelia bowed to them and announced that the Demon King Mel's was there. It seemed that Melia was still too young. In reality, her friend hadn't changed at all. In the reality, Marmelia announced the arrival of the loser. Now Mel's was in front of the Demon King Yubar, who was disappointed. Marmelia kept telling her that it was crazy to expect any kind of welcome in Judica, especially since Mel's had lost all her strength and reputation. Mel's knew she wouldn't be treated well, but she never imagined the Demon King would treat her so horribly. Lord Yubar turned to Asmodeus's descendant, giving her a chance to explain herself. Mel's insisted it was all a misunderstanding, saying she hadn't actually been defeated by humans. The demons around her sneered, asking if she really believed that just the Demon King surviving counted as a victory. Mels knew she had no comeback for that. Poor girl had no chance, and she blamed herself and admitted her fault in the loss of her army. The Demon Kings declared that she was a disgrace to their kind and insisted they should strip her of the Demon King title to prevent her from bringing any further shame. Everyone was in favor of executing her, but the demons didn't want to damage Judeka over someone like her. So they decided to settle her fate on the final day of the meeting. Lord Yubar ordered to place the criminal into the jail. Meanwhile, in the merchant city, Swallow and his maid were trying to enter the restricted area. The Guardian warned them that they'd need to show an insignia before they'd be allowed in. But Renee was ready for this and flashed her A-class raid member insignia. The Guardian immediately let them into the dungeon store. Swallow wondered when she'd managed to prepare something like that, and the maid explained that she'd held onto a few clean insignias while maintaining their dungeon. Boss understood that there should be a ton of them lying around after the raids. Renee was stunned by the massive amount of data humans had collected on different dungeons. Swallow wondered if they'd be able to read through it all in time. They decided to focus only on the specific information they were after. Renee explained that they were searching for a powerful monster that humans hadn't been able to defeat, no matter how hard they'd tried. Swallow thought it would be a lot easier to just bring another monster from the Great Evil Dungeons, but he knew Patrick would never allow that. The protagonist began to consider dungeons one level below the Great Evil Dungeons, but Renee was already ahead of him, ready with a list of suitable options for that request. Soon enough, they got to the hotel with all of those materials. Swallow was too tired and admitted that maybe he should have just recruited Mels. Renee added that she thought of that, but still it would be hard to have her work as a room manager. The maid thought about the Demon King reaching her full power in just 3 years, and by that time, she knew she'd have to work hard and train to be ready. Renee also added that she looked the coolest as a Demon King. Swallow admitted that it was true, and he should have asked her. Because Mels was pretty helpful in bringing her back home, and maybe he let her go too easily in the end. Swallow wondered how long was that Judeka going. Renee knew that it was only 2 days' event. The boss said they could give it a try, but if it turned out to be too far away, there was nothing they could do about it. He also needed to read the stars to pinpoint the location of Judeka. Renee had heard that it was a special method used by the Demon Kings, but she still had no idea how to do it herself. But it occurred that Swallow knew how to read them. The guardian of the Judeka asked the intruders to stop and said that he didn't seem like a Demon King at all. He warned that from that point on, only Demon Kings were allowed. If anyone got too close, they'd definitely lose their life. The guardian yelled that he was the servant of the great Yabar and had given them plenty of warnings. And as long as he is guarding that place, an intruder like him wouldn't get past him alive. Swallow wondered why that thing was so loud. While Mels was imprisoned, Marmelia came up to her saying that she looked better than she thought. She told her that when the kings were discussing her punishment, everyone wanted to just kill her and make an example out of her for everyone else. But Marmelia worked hard to convince them of something else. So in conclusion, they decided to cut off her horns and pull out the fangs. Marmelia said that the little girl wouldn't have anything that belonged to their race, and all the demons would look down on Mel in her pathetic state. And she probably never would have dreamed of it, how much Marmelia had been looking forward to seeing her in such a situation. And since Mels wouldn't be able to act like a demon king after losing her horns and fangs, Marmelia came up with a brilliant idea for her. She might offer her the position of licking her boots, but she wasn't satisfied with Melts not reacting to her at all. Soon enough, the guardians came with an order to bring the criminal to the court. The servant of the Lord Yabar announced that they would start the trial to determine the punishment for Demon King Melts of the House Agrilia, losing the trust of the demons under you as a leader for the great crime of bringing shame to the Demon King title. The criminal would be punished by having her horns cut and her fangs pulled out. She would also be given one last chance to defend herself. Mels began to explain that during the time she spent in the cell, she thought about many things and still couldn't understand that. In the first place, the Demon King army was created to protect her. The weak army had perished, and the strong Demon King had survived. She couldn't seem to understand what the problem was. Everyone shouted in unison, asking if that was really how she viewed her army, as a Demon King. Marmelia started laughing, saying that Mels was talking so boldly even after her army had been wiped out and she was in such a sorry state. She must have lost her mind. Mels explained that she had just come to her senses. No matter how much she thought about it, the trial didn't make sense. They claimed to judge her faults, but she hadn't done anything wrong. Mels could understand their pettiness, but it was laughable that the greatest Demon King would go along with such a farce. She turned to Sir Yubar, wondering if that wasn't the case. Mels felt a sense of relief. Those so-called supreme beings had never seen what a real villain looked like. It was especially ridiculous to think that the ones calling themselves Demon Kings could be so ignorant and laughable. The servant of Lord Yubar announced that they would decide on the punishment for her insolence after carrying out the first punishment. The creature came in and said that he looked forward to working with her. As soon as he put his blade on the horns, weird sounds came from the outside. Everyone was worried about that and wanted to know the reason. Mel's thought about the possibility of Devourer could have come all that way, The voice said that the sound of the dog barking might be more pleasant to listen to than their bullshit. Mel's thought again that there was no way that person would show up. She must be hearing things because her heart was wavering. Still, maybe if he were here. Mel's found the strength to turn around, torn between hope and despair. Lord Swallow was really sitting here and greeting her. He wondered if she was having a hard time there. Really long time ago, Sir Devourer killed each and every demon king, but found that the one was still alive. He looked at the creature with horns, guessing it might be one of their race, and asked how old it was. Lord Swallow commanded him to look directly into his eyes and introduce himself. That little punk answered that he was Sir Yubber. Mel's was extremely happy to see her fluffy friend who must have followed Mr. Devourere to find her. Marmelia was furious, yelling at Swallow and Renee, demanding to know which demon king they served. How dare they interrupt the sacred process of judgment? Renee answered that she didn't know her place and was dare to talk to them in such a bad manner. Swallow brushed off her anger and got back to the point, explaining that they didn't really belong to anyone. He said he'd just gotten curious about something. They all felt embarrassed watching Mel's act like a demon king when she had nothing left. Was that really the reason to treat her this way, talking about punishment and everything else? Then, if he were to destroy all their armies, everyone there should have no reason to complain. Having their horns cut and their fangs pulled, if he wasn't mistaken. The servant of Lord Yubbar shouted that the fool didn't even know his place. It was bad enough that he had insulted the demon kings gathered in Judeca, but now he was even going so far as to threaten Sir Yubbar. Swallow explained that he was just asking a question, but the demon threatened him to shut up, warning that he'd tear him apart until there wasn't even a corpse left to find. He wanted Swallow just to die quietly, but suddenly some kind of power stopped him. Swallow wondered why everyone was staring at him, and explained that he did nothing. Lord Yubbar himself stopped his servant and growled how dare he was to make a move against a great being. He apologized to Lord Swallow and promised to punish anyone who dared raise their sword toward the great being, and do so strictly. Yubbar greeted the supreme being Sir Devourer. Demon King understood that he was from the primordial core. The servant wondered why Sir Yubbar was acting so strangely. The Demon King couldn't help but think, what a dumbass. Does he still not understand the whole situation? Demon King wondered for what reason the great supreme being had traveled all the way here to such an unworthy place. Swallow asked him to get up because he didn't come there for all that. Yubbar remembered the memories of fear that he couldn't forget. It was the same like the last time, when he suddenly made his appearance 900 years ago. At that moment, Swallow wondered if he even knew the real reason for coming there. Sir Devourer said he didn't have to be so nervous, because he had come there for something else entirely. Swallow had come to see Lady Mel's. Renee explained that after discussing things with Mr. Devourer, they'd come to the conclusion that she was needed in the primordial core. They wanted her to become a member of the core of the ancient. Mel's couldn't believe such a proposition. Blademaid explained that if she accepted their offer, she would become a member of the primordial core as a manager of one of the rooms there. And of course there will be demonic being assigned to her room. And those demonic beings would also become part of her Demon King army. Mel's wondered if she would really end up as a manager of the room after all. Renee also mentioned that excluding Mr. Devourer would do their best. Swallow approached her and personally requested that she accept the offer. Mel's replied that it was exactly what she had always dreamed of, and she agreed. Marmelia intruded and yelled that she couldn't accept that. She was desperate, thinking how could such a dumb bitch, who couldn't even manage her own castle, possibly become a manager in the primordial core? Swallow wondered what was wrong with her. She had been compared to that foolish Mel's and been told that she was lacking, and now she finally got the chance to bring that bitch down. Marmelia addressed the great supreme being, claiming that he had been tricked by Mel's, and that she was unworthy of such an honor. She tried to advertise herself as a legitimate demon king. If only he would choose her, she would do her best. Marmelia wanted to offer him both her soul and body. Suddenly, Renee interrupted her by a blade. She yelled that she dared to try and touch Devourer with those filthy hands. The Demon King screamed in pain and agony. Lord Yubbar begged Lord Swallow to excuse that offense, promising he would make sure to punish her thoroughly. Marmelia yelled, hoping the others would let her go. But now she was the only one who had committed a crime. Renee wondered if Mel's didn't regret that decision she'd made. Blademaid added that Lord Swallow would wipe them out without hesitation if she simply asked for all the Demon Kings present to be punished. Mel's said that Primordial Core would gain nothing from doing such a thing. Of course, she didn't hold back out of the kindness of her heart. Keeping those Demon Kings alive meant they wouldn't dare look down on her anymore, and it was smarter to let them live so she could benefit from them in the long run. But now Mel's wondered how they had managed to find Judeca's location. Renee explained that Sir Devourer could read the stars. Although it was still frustrating because the gatekeeper had refused to guide them, they ran into a demonic being carrying her scent. Mel's promised that she would be putting in the effort to fit the role of a member of the primordial core. She also wondered if that would be okay with them. Renee explained that the reason they had gone through all the trouble to come and pick her up was because Sir Devourer wanted it that way. She emphasized that it was important not to disappoint him in the future. At that moment, a representative of the Northern Veermen approached Sir Yubber. The Demon King was well aware that Devourer was not only an ancient beast, but also one of the strongest entities in the Great Evil Dungeons. However, even after taking that into account, actions of Lord Yubber just now were quite strange. As the King of the Demon Kings wasn't the way he acted just now was a bit too much, and he wanted to ask exactly about that. Yubber responded that he had taken those thoughts to heart and understood the concern, that the Lord might have brought shame to the title of Demon King. The representative said that if things like this continued to happen, it would tarnish the reputation of their entire race. Yubber yelled that the representative was foolish to blame him. Did he really think Yubber would mistake his ignorance for great courage and simply forgive him? The Lord wondered if the Veerman representative was certain he wasn't just trying to seize an opportunity from his actions. If you're so worried about me, the Lord said, the one who rules over all the Demon Kings, wouldn't it be as simple as me just taking my seat? Everyone begged Sir Yubber to withhold his anger because Veerman would really die at that rate. The Lord Demon ordered them to raise their voices if they thought he had bowed his head out of weakness. Demons begged him to forgive such insolence. Yubber told them to forget it and dismissed everyone, adding that such actions should serve as a warning to all. Suddenly, Lord Swallow came up to them and wondered if King Yubber was still there. Sit Devorere wasn't to do that either, but all of them as Demon King should know more about thing. Swallow showed him a piece of paper and desired to know everything about that. Soon enough after that, those three got ready. Mel's, having finished her business, offered to help Lady Renee carry some luggage, stating that, as a member of the primordial core, it was the least she could do. But Miss Maid was fine with that and wondered if she needed anything else from there. Eventually, there was nothing more she needed. Once she returned to the primordial core, she vowed to put her best effort into becoming a strong demon king. At the same time, Marmelia was already without her horns and fangs. Her servants were worried if she was feeling well after such punishment. But the demon was desperate that Mel's left with that ancient monster. Her servants asked her not to worry about that. Still, the other Demon King were supporting her. Marmelia ordered them to shut up. She would never forget what that bitch Mel's did to her. That's why it was better to kill her. Now she needed someone that could become an enemy of Primordial Core. Someone who can stand against that great dungeon. Simultaneously, the Capitan Gar had a meeting with a person from the Third Eye. She wanted to know more about Homunculus. Those Demon Kings put in a huge effort and supplied them with detailed information about monsters. From what Mr. Devourer heard, they've picked monsters that were at least at their level. Mel's wondered why Lady Renee still wasn't satisfied, even with monsters as strong as these. They began discussing the next candidate, Succubus Queen Elizabeth. Judging by her race and profile, Renee remarked that she seemed like the type who would flirt with everyone. But the maid was still dissatisfied and failed all of the female candidates. Girls still were looking for a perfect fit for their ancient dungeon, while their boss was sleeping peacefully. Captain Gar, at that time, continued to dwell on Sir Devourer. She believed she had to take him down for the safety of the Empire, but it was impossible to do that by herself. Soon, Garrett came in, and they started to talk about new information Capitan had found in the books about Primordial Core. Of course, she already knew half of it, but as she read more, some things started to bother her. Garrett asked what that was supposed to mean, and the captain explained the identity of the gatekeeper and the true purpose of the dungeon. They could dismiss the tentacle creatures, as most of them came from unknown origins, but even after thorough searching, she had found no records of the other two. Gar realized that even after considering many variables, many things about the situation didn't add up. While most dungeons expanded their forces, the Primordial Core didn't show the slightest sign of such activity. Most importantly, Devourer's goal was unknown. But Garrett had something important to tell the Capitan. Demon King Marmolia has requested a meeting with her. Members of the Third Eye were thankful to her for accepting a sudden meeting. Soon enough, the creatures came in and wondered that the Capitan was pretty young and handsome as well. The woman explained that she was one in charge, Capitan Edelberius Gar Livestein. The demon grew suspicious since the message had stated she wouldn't be bringing any bodyguards. Marmelia replied that she was not alone here either. As soon as they sat around the table, each side decided to get straight to the main point. Marmelia explained that, in the near future, another demon king would be leaving Nahit, and she needed to assassinate her. Gar wondered if she really wanted them to fight against a demon king army. But Marmelia explained that all they have to do is kill Mel's. If they were able to kill her before she left Nahit, she would be sure to pay them handsomely. Capitan Gar answered that she had to decline her request. Marmelia wondered why she was refusing such a deal. Was there a problem? Was the payment not enough? But Gar refused that it was not it. She wondered if Demon was in a hurry. Capitan also noticed that she didn't have any fangs and her horns were cut as well, and the way she acted as if she was being chased by something. Marmelia was full of anger and yelled if that human was looking down on her. Gar explained that she was the one hiding things from her. She was asking her to kill a single demon king called Mel's. Didn't that demon king have someone backing her? She was right indeed, and the reaction of Marmelia was expected. Gar had no reason to get involved in infighting among the demon kings. She ordered Garrett to head back to the capital in that case. But Marmelia asked them to wait and explained that there was indeed someone behind her, just as the captain had mentioned. It was the ancient monster from Primordial Core Devourer. Capitan stopped and answered that she would accept her offer, and they would kill the demon king Mel's de Limfagrea. Gar knew a lot about Mel's, as she was the only demon king near Lays. They needed to hurry if that group was going to leave Nahit soon. Marmelia noticed that the captain definitely laughed when she heard the name Swallow, which meant there was something personal between them. The demon king told her to drop the act, reminding her that, in case she had forgotten, there were 400 hostages from the village of Rosoid on that side. Capitan calmed her down and explained that Marmelia could kill them all. Gar also mentioned that facing death as a sacrifice for the great empire's revival, and it would be an honorable death for them all. Since the negotiations had been settled, it was now time to receive the promised reward. Marmelia herself had mentioned earlier that she would provide a demon as a test subject. Conveniently, there was one right there. A demon king without horns and fangs was a quite suitable demon. Marmelia ordered to kill that human. The next morning, Renee woke up her boss. Maid mentioned that the reply from the messenger that she sent to Patrick on there was back from Judaica has arrived already. There was also an item included in the letter. Mel's wondered if they were supposed to use it to check their own reflections. The girls came up with the idea that it was a magic item for communication. Mel's decided to test it with Hermana. Soon enough, Patrick appeared on the glass and asked if they could hear him. Swallow started the conversation by commenting on his guardian's weird nostrils. Patrick was offended and wondered why Swallow had to start a fight as soon as he saw him. But Patrick decided to get down to business first. With Lady Mel's becoming their new member, he planned to contact them to help recruit more monsters. Swallow decided to know where did his guardian brought that item from. Skeleton commented that it was a small part of the big mirror in Bathory's room in exchange for providing Renee's blood. The Blade Maid was pissed off and warned Patrick that her knife was already ready for him. The skeleton replied that it was important to get back to the main point. Due to the lack of an outstanding monster, he had included information about the creatures he had prepared. Renee was shocked to see that. The maid was delighted and said that there were monsters not listed on the subjugation request. Skeleton added that he tried his best to arrange them. Those creatures may not be impressive individually, but they are strong as a group, and also some are well suited to take advantage of the cavernous terrain. Patrick added that he had been keeping an eye on them for a while. Swallow wondered if that meant Patrick had been doing so even before he and Renee set out to recruit monsters. Suddenly, Skeleton disappeared and left them to act quickly. Gar successfully defeated all the monsters and said that now she could receive her reward. Capitan referred to the Demon King Marmelia, who was yelling that the other Demon Kings would take revenge for her. Gar mentioned that there was no need to talk about that since she didn't care, but still, she was thankful for that matter. Thanks to her, they now had an opportunity to eliminate the Devourer. But then, Marmelia suddenly started laughing out of nowhere. Gar wondered what was so funny about it. Marmelia explained that she found her word ridiculous. She could guarantee to Gar that it was absolutely impossible to eliminate the Devourer. She didn't even understand the true terror of that ancient monster. The member of the Third Eye said that she was not worth listening to any further, and Capitan also has his gratitude for that amazing material. Gar wondered if he was sure that such a plan was possible at all. The man said that he would meet her demands perfectly. He would make the ultimate homunculus based on a demon king. Swallow and his friend departed in search of the new monster for the dungeon. It looked like they had an enemy within their ranks. Patrick had mentioned earlier that trust is the most important thing between a lord and his vassals. To increase their loyalty, Swallow had to personally handle the recruitment. They finally arrived at the destination where the guardian golem was protecting Nahit. That monster had his stones quickly gather and regenerate even after destruction, making it the perfect monster for their dungeon. That must be a place where he lives. If it is really a magic stone golem, such regeneration wouldn't be impossible as long as its core is intact. Devourer wondered if it was really a truth, then they should only look for its magic stone and take it. Renee asked if that thing could even fit into the cave. The protagonist decided to do everything by himself. He got off the flying eye straight on the golem. While fighting with that creature, Swallow commented that Patrick found quite a nice monster. Soon enough, he crashed Golem into the thousands of stones. Swallow was delighted. Renee asked Mel's to find a magic stone quickly and get ready for the next destination. Simultaneously in the caves, Cyclops were worried about the stone golem disappearing after the ground shook the day before. There were also rumors that the silver wolves which had dominated the plateau above the canyon were also subjugated. At that rate, they might be the next target. The chef Cyclops said that it was enough. There was no point in worrying about something that hadn't happened yet. Indeed, no one knew the location of their dungeon. Renee didn't expect them to really be in a place like that. Patrick's information was sure remarkable. The Cyclops wondered who they all were. Renee explained that they were just here to make a proposal. The girls were looking for monsters that would work for their dungeon. The biggest of them yelled that they wouldn't go down so easily. Renee sighed and said that the words won't work against them. The girls were really disappointed. Renee had hoped that those Cyclops wouldn't be that weak. Mels didn't expect that they would die so easily. But now they were looking for the next monster on their list named Yaksha. Suddenly a creature came down from the tree and said that he didn't really expect them to find a way there, but also he heard about the Cyclops. Renee commented that the rumors spread pretty quickly there. The monster explained that the reason their tribe had managed to live without being discovered was that they were incredibly quick at gathering information. Blade's maid supposed him to know what was about to happen without her explaining. Yaksha knew that, and said that he would accept the offer for work under one condition. The young monster wanted to have a spar with the Devourer because he had always wondered just how strong an ancient monster could be. Swallow decided to have some fun with Yaksha. He asked Protagonist to come at him with everything he had. As soon as they came back to the hotel, Swallow yelled to screw everything because he was done already. They have been going around for 2 whole days without rest, and now the only one they had recruited for sure was the Golem. The Cyclops and Yaksha were sent to the afterlife. That Yaksha never imagined he'd be blown away with just a flick of Swallow's finger. And also, Arachne already apologized for rejecting their offer. But they've gained a lot. It was truly a remarkable conquest as they killed everyone and took the spoils. Swallow wondered if there was a tool that could blow a hole in Patrick's bone. The protagonist suddenly finds precious flowers. Girls agreed that it was a very pretty flower. Swallow ordered Renee to stay still. Mels was shocked to see such a kind act from Mr. Devourer. It looked really good on her. Swallow thought about how Renee always worked hard, and it seemed like she had changed a bit since coming to Nahit. It seemed to him that she also wanted something from him, plus he had never gifted her anything. Renee wondered if it really looked good on her. Swallow confirmed that it was perfect and wondered if she might not like that. In that case, he could get her something better later. But the maid was unbelievably happy for such a present for her. Still, the trio was getting back to work. They had 2 more places to stop by. The test subject Capitan provided for the third eye was perfect. The man explained that they were doing their best. Gar had already decided what she was going to use that for. Meanwhile, Miss Wuan was bored in the capital. She had been ordered to rest a bit longer because she couldn't let anyone see that she was recovering. But doing nothing felt even worse. There might also be people in danger. Hiro wanted to check that Lais was peaceful at least. But as soon as she wanted to go away, Lady Gar came in and wondered where she was going. Capitan wanted to talk to her face to face. Wuan was desperate and asked her at least to say something before coming in. Hiro wanted to ask her about something for a while already. She wondered how Garrett was doing. She wasn't able to talk to her since that happened to her arm. And it was her fault, actually. Capitan told her not to try to shoulder all the burdens of the Empire on her own. However, she should keep in mind that everyone the Black Wolf Knights would sacrifice themselves for the sake of the Empire, with Garrett included. Additionally, she wasn't the type to be bothered by that. That's why Wuan shouldn't feel guilty. Also, Captain wanted to ask her for a favor. It was about the artificial creatures studied by the Empire in the past. Apparently, some of those beings who remained in the facility escaped, but no one was harmed in that town. That incident was something Gar needed to take care of in secret. But Wuan couldn't go out onto the front line at that moment, because the Imperial family would consider her suspicious. The hero wondered what she should do next. Gar had already secured the teleportation hub for her, and Wuan was supposed to arrive in 3 hours. 3 hours only, both of them better hurry. As soon as Gar opened the door, she was shocked to see. It had been a long time since Pope Euronisia had last seen Captain Gar. The officer wondered what brought him there. For someone who didn't serve His Majesty but someone else, her demeanor was quite unpredictable. The Pope chuckled and remarked that her words were as sneakily sharp as ever. But Euronisia just wanted to see how their hero was doing. Gar answered that as far as she knew, Wuan, Historia, and the Pope have never met, not even once. Even so, he claimed he was there to check on her well-being. The officer, however, was far too busy for such concerns. The Pope wondered aloud if she would believe him if he said he had come just to see her. Yura then asked Gar if he could have a word with her for a moment. The officer had no idea what kind of scheme that was. To make such an absurd proposal at that time. Gar was standing on the tower in Nahit, which was a mercenary city, where 1/3 of the residents were part of the raid squad, and Devourer was hiding somewhere in that city. To eliminate that ancient monster, she needed much more information, and to achieve that he would have to use a risky approach. Sir Storman announced that they had finished the preparations and were currently awaiting her orders. The Third Eye mentioned that they were ready too, and questioned how the captain planned to track down the Demon King hiding within the city. Gar explained that for an ordinary human like her, there was no unique method to achieve such a feat. Also, there was someone who was currently searching for that Demon King more desperately than them, so she planned to use that. Sir Storman mentioned that there were still 78 minutes until the hero's arrival. It was a little early, but they decided to start right away. Indeed, Marmelia's unique ability to summon Mel's was key to their plan. It was a power so specific to the Demon Kings. Homunculus started attacking people outside. Chaos erupted as the situation spiraled out of control. Some knights, clearly distressed by the unfolding calamity, voiced their concerns aloud, saying it was too extreme, even for an order issued by the Empire. The knights murmured that, even as an order from His Majesty, something about it felt off. Members of the Third Eye quickly silenced them, demanding they hold their tongues. The man never expected them to cause a massacre like that right in the middle of the city. Gar reassured them, saying there was no need to fret so much. The city wouldn't be completely wiped out. At last, the main homunculus emerged before them, unleashing chaos as everything around began to crumble under the onslaught of those creatures. The man continued to yell that at that rate all the residents would be killed, but when he caught Gar's glance, he understood that everything was planned from the start. The officer asked that young man to calm down. There was nothing but a small sacrifice. Based on her data, Devourer for sure didn't wish for complete annihilation of Nehet. The fact that Swallow avoided destruction was strange. He might even start fighting against the homunculus destroying that city, depending on the situation. Gar watched the destruction unfold with a twisted sense of satisfaction, shouting that the Empire's citizens were nothing more than sacrifices for the growth of their nation. Young Knight understood that bitch was insane. Simultaneously, Lord Swallow and his girls saw a huge fire in the town. Devourer screamed in desperation, unable to bear the thought of something happening to his beloved bad.